Chapter 59. That night, Luoya had a hard time. The New Year prayer meeting was a holy day for Shiya's believers. The event started before dawn, and the chanting of the holy words and prayers lasted for about 2 hours. There were 3 consecutive sessions, and it would only end when the sun rose. As a guest of the Holy See, Luoya naturally received special treatment. He was arranged to sit in the VIP area, where he could pray together with the other guests from various countries. However, the VIP area did not have any snacks or sofas. In fact, the so-called VIP area was only the area closest to old Master John, who was chanting the holy words. Yes, it was the area closest to the Holy See in the San Carlos Square. Each brick could fit a person, so it was much more spacious than the crowd. What Luoya had to do was to stand with these devout believers and pray on these bricks until dawn. What kind of torture was this? Luoya, who was not very devout in his beliefs, had a pained expression on his face. He was not interested in this event, but he was a guest of the Holy See, so he could not leave midway. Wouldn't that be a slap to old Master John's face? And so, a difficult night began. Luoya stood from midnight until dawn, and he only rested twice in between. He finally escaped after the 3rd session of the prayer meeting. Of course, there were not many people like him. Most of the believers were still very excited. After the prayer meeting, the first round of sprinkling the holy candies would begin. This was a very interesting event. People generally believed that the first round of sprinkling the holy candies would contain the most blessings. It was somewhat similar to how the first incense in Zhang Heng's previous life was the most effective. Therefore, the crowd on both sides of the road increased instead of decreasing. However, this good luck was not worth mentioning to Luoya. After all, he had just received the Holy See's blessing last night. As for the holy candies, if he wanted them, he could just ask Nua Iyer, and she would at least give him a can. Of course, Miss Angel's candy couldn't be taken for free. It was her specialty to stir up trouble. Thinking of this, Luoya shuddered. She didn't want to eat the candy. Under the escort of the knights, Luoya looked out of the window at the happy pedestrians all the way back home. After getting off the carriage, he didn't forget to give the head knight 10 gold coins. It's the new year. We can't work for nothing. Thank you for your protection. Lady Luoya, thank you for your generosity. May Shia bless you. The knights who got some extra money smiled and waved goodbye to Luoya. The young man walked into the labyrinth under the escort of his servants, only to find that no one had come back. Kadia, Tai Lizzie, and Anna were all absent. Were they? Master sent news that this year, Prince Kai-in has organized a New Year's winter hunt for everyone. Master, Miss Ai Lizzie, and the others will also participate. They will probably return the night after tomorrow. The day after tomorrow? Does this mean that Master wants to celebrate the new year by himself? Are you kidding me? If I had known, I wouldn't have come back. It's too lonely. Luoya looked at the empty house and the unfamiliar servants in the holy capital. He had a strange feeling that he was a guest in someone else's house. Forget it, I'm too sleepy. I'm going to sleep. The black-haired young man yawned out of boredom. He complained that he didn't have Ai Lizzie to drink during the new year as he returned to his room. He casually took off his coat and fell asleep on his bed. When Luoya opened his eyes again, the house was completely dark. Only a faint light illuminated the room behind him. After sleeping for a long time, Luoya turned over and felt his back relax. He sighed comfortably. Phew, what time is it now? 6 o'clock in the evening. Luoya was startled by the sudden answer. He got up and saw the golden-haired girl sitting on the chair. At this time, the Nua Iyer was laughing hysterically because of Luoya's panicked look. Your expression just now was so funny. I didn't wait in vain. You bastard, the black-haired young man gritted his teeth and looked at the happy Nua Iyer. He almost drew his sword. Seeing this, the girl finally stopped laughing. I say, you didn't ask for permission to enter my room, okay? Chapter 60. Her 2 delicate fingers were holding a light red candy. Her blonde hair was shining brightly under the light, and her legs were long and slender like a work of art. Her flushed cheeks and joyful yet sadistic eyes revealed the excitement in her heart, and the corners of her mouth were curled up in a playful smile. Beautiful, really beautiful. Luoya swallowed his saliva as he looked at the beauty under the light. He had to admit that the Nuo Ayer's charm was simply fatal. Moreover, she treated Luoya very well. After all, in the original novel, the male lead was an imperial prince. The Nuo Ayer allowed him to lick her shoes, not even her feet. However, she allowed Luoya to lick her fingers. The difference in treatment was as different as heaven and earth. Was he tempted? Looking at the candy between her fingers and the beauty tempting him like a snake in the Garden of Eden, Luoya would be lying if he said that he wasn't tempted. But a bootlicker's momentary pleasure, the villain's cremation. Luoya didn't forget who he was. The path of removing the villain's flag was always different from his past self. Being a bootlicker of the Nuo Ayer was a big taboo. He had the life to lick, but not the life to enjoy. Put it away, I'm not eating. Luoya turned his head and said coldly. The Nuo Ayer blinked and frowned in confusion. But you're obviously tempted, aren't you? Who's tempted? Don't talk nonsense. Besides, are your hands clean? I don't eat things peeled by others. Of course I washed my hands. You really don't want to eat? I'm not eating. Luoya's answer made Miss Angel quite dissatisfied. She couldn't help but complain. I really don't understand. Why are you so against me? You don't even want to eat the candy I peeled for you. Is the point the candy? You just want to see me lick the candy on your hand, right? The young man's accusation made the girl's face turn slightly awkward. She looked away and said, Candy is also very important. It's the blessing of the new year. Then give it to me directly. Mr. Luoya, your hands don't seem to be clean? Why do I remember that you seem to be very hygienic? Nuo Ayer stared at Luoya's outstretched hand with a mocking expression. The boy who was slapped in the face by his own words could only withdraw his hand resentfully. Then wrap it in candy wrappers. The candy wrapper was just thrown away. Then just throw it into my mouth. What's wrong? You're already at source level 5 and you can't even throw things properly? Open your mouth then. Nuo Ayer was speechless in dissatisfaction. She threw the candy into Luoya's open mouth. The young man looked at the deflated girl and smiled with the candy in his mouth. Ha, you want to fight with me? Luoya, who had won the battle, was very pleased. Then, in the midst of this complacency, Nuo Ayer's dissatisfied expression suddenly changed into a smile. She stroked her face and said some heart-wrenching words. Hee, is this the fun of feeding a pet? You look so cute when you open your mouth like a puppy with a ball in its mouth. You bastard! You're playing me. Chapter 61. The moon was high in the sky, and the silver light shined on Roha, who was sitting by the window in a daze. The boy shook his legs and looked at the hands of the clock and sighed. Sigh, I can't sleep. During the day there was no one at home, so he slept until dinner. After eating with Nuo Ayer, the two chatted for more than 2 hours. After a tiring day, the young girl went back to her room to sleep, while Luoya was completely awake. He went to the study room to get a book and read until midnight. However, Luoya was still not sleepy. After thinking for a while, the young man decided to go out for a walk. After putting on a coat, Luoya walked out of his room. The maid on night duty asked him if he needed anything. The young man looked at the royal servant brought by Nuo Ayer and shook his head. I'm just taking a walk. You don't have to follow me. Yes, Luoya-sama. The maid returned to her original position, while Luoya walked around the house alone. My house is quite big. Luoya sighed inexplicably as he walked around the maze hall. As the host, Luoya should have brought Nuo Ayer to visit the maze hall. However, due to the poor lighting at night, this matter was postponed until tomorrow. Good evening, young Master Luoya. Is there anything I can help you with? No, nothing. I just can't sleep. Is Her Highness asleep? Yes, Her Highness has been asleep for 2 hours. I see. Luoya looked at the room enviously and replied. Just as he was about to say goodbye, he suddenly remembered something. By the way, did she win the choir competition today? Yes, Her Highness' singing was like the sound of nature. All the judges present were amazed. The maid Mia proudly answered Luo Ya's question. The young man nodded and thought of the young girl's dissatisfaction when he didn't go to watch the competition. After thinking for a while, he asked, "Do you have any recording equipment that can record the singing or video? Are you talking about the shadow recording stone? Of course, we are prepared. Every year, the church will record the many programs at the beginning of the New Year's prayer and sell them to various countries in order to let the people far away also bask in the glory of Shia." Mia's words made Luo Ya stare blankly. The teenagers suddenly remembered that there was such a thing, but the Akkad family never bought it. It wasn't because of how expensive the shadow recording stone was. The real reason was that the opening of the church was too boring. After a whole night of prayer, Luo Ya estimated that other than the most devout believers, no one would be able to watch that stupid stone for more than 6 hours. "There's one in the Psalm Symposium? Yes, it will be recorded. Then can you bring me a piece tomorrow? I want to watch His Highness compete, so that she wouldn't find fault with me again." Luo Ya added the second half of the sentence in her heart. The servant girl heard the first half of the sentence, but imagined a lot. She widened her eyes in surprise, and then her head turned green. She showed an ambiguous and touched smile. "Favorability plus 200 What was going on? Why are you green? Does your family sell this?" Luo Ya looked at the servant girl whose favorability suddenly increased. He was speechless. Thinking about it carefully, he seemed to have always had the talent to make the servant girl green. His family was the same, and he often made the house green. "I didn't expect young Master Luo Ya to be so considerate. I believe His Highness will be very happy to know." No, please rest assured, I will prepare the shadow recording stone tomorrow. I will give it to you by the day after tomorrow at the latest," Mia said excitedly, full of enthusiasm. The servant girl who had taken care of Nua Iyer for many years naturally knew that Her Highness was lonely. Therefore, she supported this teenager who broke her loneliness. Chapter 62. What did it feel like to have a perverted ancestor? Luo Ya felt that he was now qualified to answer this question. He was panicking, and feeling very embarrassed. All along, Luo Ya had always treated Nua Iyer with a "don't come near me" attitude. But today, he wanted her to stay by his side and not leave his sight. There was too much information in Ponte's diary that Luo Ya couldn't take it all. Based on the little information that he saw, Luo Ya could see a lot of attributes. Teacher and student, airport enthusiast, and maybe even a lolicon. TSK. This guy didn't get killed by Wei Dualia. I should really thank Prince Vader for his rebellion. Otherwise, What did you say? Nothing. How does the tea taste? Not bad. This teacup is also very good. The ancestors' taste is excellent. Luo Ya looked at Nua Iyer, who was focused on something else, and heaved a sigh of relief. The royal family rarely came to the labyrinth. If he could hold on for the day and send Nua Iyer away tomorrow night, everything would be fine. The reputation of the clan would depend on today and tomorrow. The young man encouraged himself and set a goal of stalling for time. Nua Iyer finished studying a tea set and looked at the door of the tea house with interest. What's that hole on the door? Isn't that a door mirror? So why is there a door mirror here? Isn't that something for external use? Usually, it's only at the entrance. I've observed it before and found that almost every room has it on the door. Is there any special meaning? No, there's no special meaning. Just as you said, it's only at the entrance. But Luo Ya revealed a rare smile in front of the young girl and pointed to the door of the tea house. Every door in the labyrinth pavilion is an entrance. What? Nua Iyer opened her big blue eyes and blinked cutely. Seeing this, Luo Ya explained to her in detail. The labyrinth pavilion. This building was chosen by Ponte Akkad and Wei Dualia as their hiding place not only because of its familiarity, but also because of its structure and its compatibility with the labyrinth's secret treasure. The labyrinth back then was actually divided into 2 layers. The outer layer extended to several streets outside, and the thick fog divided the streets into dozens of blocks. Every time you crossed the boundary in the fog, you would immediately enter other areas. Apart from a certain period of time, you would almost never reach your destination. That's why it was called the Great Labyrinth. The inner layer is the interior of this building. Every door here can function as an entrance. I heard that back in the day, they were all heavy and ugly metal doors with inscriptions. Now, they have been replaced with ordinary metal wooden doors. But even so, the unique feature of the door mirror still remains. Luo Ye smilingly explained the structure of the labyrinth to the Nuo Iyer, which really broadened the girl's knowledge. Is that labyrinth still usable? It's no longer possible to make a large one, but it's still possible to make a small one. Luo Ye pondered and recalled the ancestral heirloom that Ka Dia once brought him to familiarize himself with. It was a piece of rainbow-colored fragment, which was much more reliable than the diary left behind by the ancestral heirloom. On the other side of the tea table, Nuo Iyer looked at the young man who was thinking about the treasure and happily picked up the teacup. Favorability plus 200. Although she didn't know the reason, Luo Ye's attitude towards her today was much better than usual. At least, he didn't try to avoid her like she was the plague, which made her feel quite good. Nuo Iyer wasn't a masochist. If she treated her with a cold attitude, it would also make her feel unhappy. It was better to say that as a member of the royal family, she had a strong self-esteem and would automatically alienate this kind of person. In the end, a cold attitude could only attract the interest of important people. This kind of thing only happened in novels. In reality, the more likely result of playing this kind of game, the more likely it would result in the distance between them, or even be hated. Nuo Iyer and Luo Ye's situation was more like secret sharers. They were friends who could open themselves up to each other without hiding anything. Most importantly, although Luo Ye had always been against her, he had never discriminated against her. Nuo Iyer was very clear about this point. Moreover, Luo Ye had known her secret for so long, but he didn't have any intention of using her as a bargaining chip. He also didn't reveal her secret. His character was quite good, but it would be better if he was closer to her. The young girl sighed as she drank her tea. In her opinion, the difficulty of winning over Luo Ye was quite high. She didn't know how that silver-haired child was able to be so close to him. Nuo Iyer envied AI Lizzie, but she didn't know that at this time, AI Lizzie was about to cry when she heard about the two of them celebrating the new year together. It was Ka Dia who tried his best to pacify her. Chapter 63. Luo Ye felt that Nuo Iyer was a good person. To eat and sleep well, Luo Ye believed that this was the most basic human happiness. For people who could give or greatly increase his happiness, Luo Ye believed that they were all good people. Although they were occasionally a little mischievous, how could they not make mistakes? Luo Ye felt that these were all understandable, especially in front of delicious food. Chewing on the glitter fish sashimi and feeling the chewiness, Luo Ye felt that the chefs of this world had a very deep understanding of food. At least, they were no longer talking about color, fragrance, and chewiness. This was a big improvement. The taste of gourmet in the Celestial Empire was generally very good. After tasting all the spicy, fresh, and fragrant dishes in the Yangtze River, they would often look down on the mountains. Although Luo Ye's family was not particularly rich in his previous life, he had traveled with his parents to many places. He had also eaten hot pot in the mountain city and tasted fat sheep in the grassland. The pursuit of food was deeply engraved in his soul. However, although Luo Ye was a foodie and was very happy to visit the imperial chef, Nuo Iyer seemed a little reserved. Or it could be said that she seemed to have something on her mind. As for how to tell, it was naturally because of her appetite. Although the imperial cuisine was exquisite and delicious, the portion was not much. A child like Luo Ye would not feel full even if he ate the entire set. Although Nuo Iyer was a girl and should eat less, it was impossible for there to be so much left. Luo Ye looked at the dessert on the girl's plate and blinked in confusion. What's going on? Don't girls eat desserts in their other stomach? It was fine if she couldn't eat the previous one, but she couldn't eat this one? Lose weight? No way, there was no fatty among the angels, right? Bad appetite? That's not very likely. How could a bloodline be so delicate? The teenager thought about it and couldn't figure out what was wrong with Nuo Iyer. He carefully observed the girl's expression and found that the angel seemed a little absent-minded. Nuo Iyer, what are you thinking about? Nothing. No, you obviously have something on your mind. I didn't eat much. Luoya was speechless as he glanced at his clean plate. As a noble, he was too embarrassed to ask for more food after he finished eating. Every time he ate a small portion of the food, he would feel tormented when he saw Noel's leftover food. TSK royal family, what a waste. In her heart, she criticized the other party's extravagant lifestyle. Even though her mouth was Luoya, she still had to do her best. After all, she had eaten so much of his food for free. She should at least have a good attitude, right? After all, one's mouth is soft when one receives gifts. However, to Luoya's surprise, Nua Iyer didn't show her true nature as a masochist. Instead, she stuttered and didn't know how to answer. The blonde girl frowned in confusion. She couldn't find words to describe her current feelings. Or rather, it was her first time experiencing such feelings. It was a twisted feeling that came from her bloodline. It was as if someone was staring at her from somewhere. She couldn't calm down and even felt uneasy. Even Nua Iyer didn't know what she was afraid of. Although the girl had heard from her elders that the angel's bloodline had the ability to foresee danger, Nua Iyer had never experienced it before. She didn't know if it was the same feeling she was feeling now. Most importantly, she didn't think that she and Luoya would be in any danger. The girl raised her head and looked around. Not to mention the maids and servants standing in the distance, she had brought a whole team of royal guards with her. In addition to the Akat family's personal guards protecting Luoya, there were nearly 200 extraordinaires surround the maze. 200 extraordinaires could be said to be a small army, and they were elite soldiers with a high degree of professionalism. Not to mention the sentries in the mansion, even the floor-to-ceiling window where the two were standing was full of sentries and patrols everywhere. In recent days, Nua Iyer had seen many rulers of small countries who came to Saint Lorraine to worship. Even some kings couldn't reach such a powerful guard force. In addition to these, the two also had a curse vessel to protect them. As a princess, Nua Iyer was born with a special curse vessel to protect her. Luoya was the heir of a local aristocrat. They had no enemies before, and after the birthday party incident, they should have gotten something from Kadia. With the protection of the curse vessel, the safety level of the two had improved by leaps and bounds. Last but not least, this was Saint Lorraine, the headquarters of the Holy See. It was also the core area controlled by the Heathcliff clan. Once something happened to Nua Iyer and Luoya, the Holy See's rescue team could arrive within 5 minutes. Nua Iyer didn't believe that there was anyone in this world who was willing to go head-to-head with the Holy See in the Holy See. Am I overthinking? The golden-haired girl muttered to herself as she placed her hand on her chest. Logically speaking, she would understand that her worries were groundless. However, her emotions and physical discomfort made her decide to say a few more words. Luoya, do you have your curse vessel with you? Protective curse vessel. Oh, you're talking about this. The black-haired boy listened to Nua Iyer's words, touched his chest, and picked up a small amethyst pendant. Ciri's protection stone, a curse vessel made by Ciri, the great scholar of Bologna, the kingdom of scholars. It can resist several attacks from high-level extraordinaires. This was the curse vessel that Kadia gave to Luoya after the birthday party. Although it seemed useless to only block several attacks from high-level extraordinaires, it was almost impossible for high-level extraordinaires to assassinate him. Chapter 64. In the dark castle, in a room with no entrance, a blond man with a cold face looked up at the floating portrait and frowned. After nearly a month, the oil painting of the prophecy was completely different from the last time Brian saw it. If the previous oil painting was a casual work of a poor artist, then this time it was a masterpiece by a famous artist. The overall quality of the oil painting had risen by more than one level. The young boy and girl in the painting were now lifelike, and the surrounding environment and buildings had become clearer. Normally, this was a good thing. The clearer the painting was, the closer it was to the fulfillment of the prophecy, and the harder it was to change it. The oil painting in front of him was almost complete, which meant that the young boy from the Ackett family and the girl from Heathcliff were about to suffer. However, Brian had a different opinion about this. After all, he had suffered a loss in the prophecy before. This painting is not their death scene. From this point of view, The ending is not certain, Brian said coldly. It was obvious that he was not optimistic about the prophecy. On the other side of the long table, the collector chuckled. That's right. But with the portrait completed to this extent, I'm afraid they won't be able to escape their misfortune. Who's behind this? The Mithril Hermit Order. Of course, there might be someone else behind this. They wanted to work with us, but I rejected them. You rejected them? I don't think so. This time, it's not only the Akkad family, but also the people from the Akkad family. Heirloom families represent variables. If it's just one, it's fine, but if there are two at the same time, the possibility of variables is too high. But in order to express our stance, I still sent a precious assistant to fill in the gaps in their plan and increase their chances of success. What about this painting? I showed it to them, but they don't think it's a sign of failure. Some of them don't believe in our prophecy, and some of them think it's an opportunity. Now, there should be people from the Akkad family hiding in the streets of the holy capital. The collector's tone was cheerful, and there was a hint of mockery in it. Brian listened to the internal conflicts and cooperation between the cults, but his expression did not change. He just stared at the painting as if something was constantly attracting his attention. The blond man's unusual reaction naturally attracted the figure's attention. The laughter stopped and collector's tone was filled with curiosity. You've been staring at this painting since the beginning. What's going on? I haven't seen many things that can interest you. Is it this young man? No, although he's part of the reason, I still feel an inexplicable sense of familiarity with this place. Brian stared at the scant scenery in the oil painting, unable to relax his brows. It should be an old district. Judging from the type of houses, it didn't seem to belong to the noble district. The decorations were more retro. If it was in other cities, it might be easier to find such a place, but in Saint Lorraine, it was everywhere. This city had maintained peace throughout its long history. There were simply too many ancient buildings from hundreds of years ago. Retro was not a characteristic, but a common phenomenon. Thinking of this, Brian's doubts were slightly dispelled. As long as he passed by the old streets of the holy capital a few more times, it would not be strange for him to have a sense of déjà vu. Shaking his head, Brian decided to withdraw his attention. He stared at the teacup in front of him for a while, then raised his head and asked, "What about the Shia church? It's impossible to do whatever we want in Saint Lorraine. We can't avoid that person." Brian did not call him by his name, but collector understood what he meant. The Holy See was the protector of the land of the holy city of Lorraine. The entire Shia cult was rampant, perhaps infuriated by both gods and men, but only in the theocracy. In the holy city, all cult forces could leave if they could, and if they couldn't, they would do their best to suppress themselves. If they were dragons, they would coil up. If they were tigers, they would lie down. In short, they would spare no effort to eliminate their presence, even if everyone knew that he could see them. No one could escape his eyes, so everyone could only hope to stay low, so low that he was too lazy to care about them. I don't know what the Mithril Priory is thinking, but I think they want to exchange some benefits with that person. The Mithril Priory has been established for a long time. Although they have been keeping a low profile, they have an obvious advantage in terms of intelligence. The things they can offer should be very valuable, so I decided to help them this time. The man in the dark calmly explained the plan this time and told Brian the goal of the appraisal meeting. It was not important to participate, but to avoid being sold as trading materials, it could be said that it was a wise choice to protect oneself. The Mithril Priory has been away from the theocracy for too long. Let's not talk about places like Rose for now. Saint Mestre is not a low-difficulty area. Shia's brilliance does exist here, but our friend doesn't seem to understand this. Brian nodded when he heard this. He somewhat understood why collector had been taking pleasure in other people's misfortune all this time. In the theocracy of Saint Mestre, this country controlled by the Church of the Primordial Goddess, the cult had always been the lowest level in all the countries. It was rare for there to be any big news in 10 years. In the eyes of the Church of the Primordial Goddess, the cult was weak and easy to bully, but in fact, it was the opposite. Chapter 65. Peter Carter was in a bad mood because of his bad luck. The burly man from the appraisal meeting did send him here, and before he came, he knew that this trip was actually a lottery. If he drew a good lot, he would only meet his target, Luoya, the cut. In this case, Peter would immediately retreat. If he drew a bad lot, he would meet Luoya and a random guard. In this case, as long as he didn't meet a tough opponent, Peter should be able to handle it with his own ability. The bad lot, which was the worst case, was meeting Luoya and Nuair together. Heathcliff had the blood of angels. This was not a family that could be easily messed with. It was a common understanding among all the cults in Shia that they couldn't play dirty with this family. Hundreds of years ago, the secret ritual church did not believe in this evil and assassinated Heathcliff's people. As a result, the church began a 40-year-long hunt without caring about the cost. For more than 40 years, the secret ritual church traveled to all the human countries. They even hid in the secret land deep in the mountains. However, no matter where they went, the church's butcher's knife followed them like a shadow. After more than 40 years, this organization with more than 10,000 extraordinaires was wiped out. The church used practical actions to tell all the cults and other organizations that in a head-on conflict, they could fight and kill. The sacrifice of Heathcliff's people was because they were not skilled, but if anyone dared to assassinate them, no matter where they fled to, the church would kill them all. Peter's target was not Nuair, so this was not a big deal. According to the normal procedure given by the organization, he just had to control or injure her, kill Luoya, and leave immediately. However, in reality, Peter was not willing to do this. Beating up the heir of Heathcliff, what good would that do? Maybe he would be marked by some special means. So what if he could run away for a while? When Nuair ascended to the throne, would he be able to run away for a lifetime? Peter was not a fool. In fact, he had a good plan. He could carry out the mission given by the higher-ups, but only if the benefits and risks were reasonable. Thinking of this, the man looked at the shocked children who had yet to recover from the sudden change and came up with an idea. He decided to start a familiar survival race. Good evening, little friends. I apologize for my sudden visit. I'm a pious monk from the secret Silver Monastery. I'm here on orders to take the life of one of you. This space is my bloodline ability. It is my art studio that is independent of the world. You can try it. I believe that the amulet curse vessel in your hands should have failed. I can tell you the way to remove this space. That is, the dead will appear. I don't care who this person is, but one of you two must die, so I have a suggestion. How about the two of you fight it out? Peter Carter's face was full of smiles. He was like an agent encouraging players to participate in the competition, but also like a demon luring people into the abyss. He slowly told an exquisite lie. I promise you that I will only kill the one who lost. I won't touch the other one. The gentlemanly man explained the rules of this competition to the two children in detail, claiming that he had no choice but to not act, that this operation was the will of the Hermit Order's upper echelons, but because of his small act of leniency, one of them would be able to survive. Peter was very conflicted about this quota. For the sake of fairness, he felt that the two of them should decide who lived and who died. That was this competition. After saying these words, the man smiled mysteriously, as if he had done a good deed. At the same time, the distorted portraits in the dark art studio also smiled. The ear-piercing laughter that sounded like demons and ghosts echoed in the room, making the two children pale. Yes, that's right. Peter looked at the two boys and girls who were stiff and couldn't help but laugh in his heart. Human nature was selfish. This was the truth. Although a good education could erase the excessive part to a certain extent, there were also means to expand this part. What Peter used was fear. When a person was afraid, they would lose their ability to judge and become more egoistic. In this arena-like environment that Peter had set up, he was the absolute powerhouse and the one who made the promises. He was just like the king here. No matter how smart the others were, they could only be at his mercy if they were not as strong as him. In this art studio, such a competition was not the first time. Here, the nobles and the servants fought for the hope of survival. Here, the daughters of the rich and the coachmen fought for survival. In the face of life and death, status was no longer a problem. Not to mention, The princess of the Heathcliff family had a higher status and stronger ability. She will kill Luoya for me, Peter thought at this moment. Opposite him, the two children listened to Peter's explanation and completely digested the information after communicating with him. Luoya held the protection curse vessel he got from Kadia and kept injecting magic element into it. However, the pendant that could generate a powerful shield to ensure the owner was not hurt did not respond. He endured the headache and looked up at Nuair. He found that Ms. Angel was also checking her protection curse vessel. What this guy said was actually true. Luoya's shock at this moment was indescribable. He didn't understand how this guy avoided so many guards and approached them. He also didn't understand the situation in this space. The boy didn't know that he was now facing the joint forces of two organizations that had reached the king-level assassination lineup. He didn't know why the two were targeted, but he knew one thing: only kill the loser. Pure bullshit. Looking at the red-hot lump on Peter's head, Luoya would never believe this guy's nonsense. Although the skill Bloody Calamity depended on the person's head, the color was divided into levels. Chapter 66. When Luoya saw the light wings on Nuair's back spread open to protect him, the feeling in his heart was indescribable. He had thought about the possible actions that Noel might take. Maybe it was a calm communication, maybe it was a precaution to keep a distance, or maybe it was a forced fight. But in all of his expectations, this was not the only thing he had thought of. Nuair actually left his back open to him. Although Luoya did not have any source of power, he still had the ability to attack. Or rather, he had a method that could definitely hurt Nuair. The winged dagger. This dagger was personally sharpened by Nuair. It could easily break through the defense of an open-source grade 5. If Luoya was determined to stab Nuair in the back at such a close distance, Nuair might not be able to dodge it. Her back was facing him, which meant that she had absolute trust in him. Luoya always knew that Nuair was good to him, but he never thought that she would go to this extent. Did she have absolute confidence that she could defeat him? No. Although he did not know if Nuair had any trump cards, Luoya knew how she felt right now. Her hand that was holding Luoya's hand was trembling. Although it was barely noticeable, there was no doubt that she was not as calm as she appeared to be. In this dark art room, surrounded by terrifying portraits, her performance had far exceeded Luoya's expectations. Of course, it was not only Luoya's expectations that exceeded Nuair's expectations. Peter was also completely dumbfounded. He never thought that the method he used to become famous would become a catalyst for the girl. Your Highness, Princess of Heathcliff, you seem to have some misunderstanding about us. Although we are a cult and should be hanged, it doesn't mean that we will lie. Peter's eyes swept over the girl and the boy, and he decided to make things clear. I have a rough idea of the strength of the two of you. Your Highness, if you were to start a fight, I think you would be able to obtain an overwhelming victory. If you are worried that I will tell others that you killed that young man, there is no need for that. After all, we are an evil cult. If I say something like that, it will only be regarded as slander and backfire. Are you done? What? In front of the long-winded Peter, the blonde girl stared at him sternly and answered Peter's question indifferently. I, Nuair Heathcrete, as the future heir of the royal family, was born with responsibilities and obligations. In terms of official affairs, Luoya is my future subject. As the monarch, I should protect him. In terms of personal relations, Luoya is my closest friend. As a friend, I should respect and love him. I am his protector, his shield in the face of all unreasonable persecution, just like the emblem of our family. Do you think your flowery words can make me give up my responsibility and pride and become your accomplice? You are insulting me, villain. Nuair's powerful words stunned Luoya. For the first time, he experienced the feelings of the group of people who followed her in the game. The boy opened his mouth, but he didn't know what to say. For a moment he felt his throat dry up. A gentleman would die for his bosom friend. It didn't match the current situation, but Nuair's attitude did indeed move Luoya. Her wings of light stretched out behind her back, and she was surrounded by light, but it was not worth mentioning compared to the light in her heart. Peter's face was full of anger, but he was tongue-tied by the girl's words. In his eyes, Nua Ayer's thoughts were crazy. Natural selection, survival of the fittest. What's wrong with the strong killing the weak? It's because of your beast-like uncivilized thinking that you are called cultists. You are indifferent to human life and challenge the order of society. You are destroyers, enemies of civilization. Well, that may be what you think, but what about him? Peter's eyes turned to stare at the black-haired boy, and he sneered. He almost drew his sword just now. The relationship between the two of you is just SOSO. He is afraid, which means that he doesn't know me well enough. We can slowly communicate in the future. Nu Ayer turned back and glared at Luoya. The boy's face flashed with embarrassment, but the girl didn't blame him after that. Instead, she turned her head and said coldly, "Thank you for your reminder. We will become closer in the future, but you don't need to question our relationship." The blonde girl's words made the pale cultist widen his eyes, and his expression was extremely strange. What's the matter with that kid called Luoya? How did he win over the heir of Heathcliff? Why is he being protected like this? Peter's mood was now a little crazy. He panted, thinking that he should make the two kids more desperate. Chapter 67. In the empty basilica, Lucas' words fell. However, what awaited him was not an answer, but a long silence. Although this man with gentlemanly etiquette did not say it out loud, John of the Holy See understood what he meant. In the end, as long as one was in the Holy Capital, there would be no extraordinary who could escape Hardedef's eyes and defy his will. He was actually very clear on what was happening in this city. This was also why Kadia was at ease in leaving Roja alone in the Holy Capital. The Mithril Hermit Order naturally knew this as well, which was why they came to negotiate with John, hoping to gain his acquiescence with enough benefits. "We will not harm Heathcliff's son, please rest assured. We know the current situation of the theocracy, and we have ways to cover it up after we succeed. Luoya Akit will not die in the Holy Capital, and everything will be an accident. The Akit family will not be able to find anything that can be used against them, so there will be no estrangement between them and the royal family. If you are still worried, we can even strike the Eric family to a certain extent, which will buy at least 10 years for the royal family. We are not targeting the Akit family under your protection, but the child of the prophecy. The current patriarch Kadia Akit is in his prime, and is fully capable of passing on the bloodline again. The Akit family will not be cut off, and the balance of power among the 5 noble families will not be affected." Vice President Lucas' humble voice echoed in the hall. There was no doubt that the Mithril Hermit Order had made sufficient preparations this time. The way they dealt with this matter was very appropriate, and the impact on the theocracy would be minimized. Even the church and the royal family would benefit from it. As the saying went, seeking benefits and avoiding harm was human instinct, and this was even more true for families. Lucas was quite confident in the Hermit Order's sincerity. John was indeed a holy see, but he was also the patriarch of the Heathcliff family. The continuation of a family definitely wasn't something that could be maintained by hot-bloodedness. Rationality, calmness, and making decisions that maximized the benefits. Sometimes, when the price was high enough, one could even consider severing family ties and friendships. A family head's mission wasn't to play house with everyone. Every family head only had one mission: to develop and strengthen the family's power. Strictly speaking, a family head who did anything that went against this mission wasn't qualified. It could be said that the Hermit of Mithril had put in a lot of effort in this aspect. Heathcliff's deal this time was equivalent to exchanging the heir of another family for the stability of his family for 10 years. It was a deal that even a fool could understand. Besides, the deal with the Hermit of Mithril came with enough guarantees, because if the Hermit of Mithril went back on their word, they would definitely be hunted down. The sincerity and reason were sufficient, but to Lucas' surprise, the old man named John didn't have much of a reaction. The white-haired old man leaned back in his chair and narrowed his eyes. He looked like an ordinary old man who was about to doze off under the afternoon sun. He recalled the appearance of Luoya, whom he met not long ago. Luoya was a somewhat strange young man. Although he was still young, his eyes showed that he had experienced a lot of things. However, he was also a pure young man. When he saw John's attitude, he didn't show any flattery or arrogance. John could feel the purity and integrity in his heart. Carolyn Acate, Vincent Acate, Roy Acate. These are all familiar names to you, right? The old man pointed out these names that used to make some people tremble in fear, but now, as time went on, they gradually faded into the river of time. Lucas frowned when he heard this. John looked at him with a smile on his face. You are afraid of them. You are afraid of their bloodline, and you are also afraid of their spirit. You are afraid that they will bring something from history that you don't want to see. They won't even let go of a child with a prophecy. Perhaps that is the case. But if there are no more troublesome characters in the Acate family, it won't be a bad thing for you and Heathcliff, will it? In fact, we can even reach an agreement on this point. Lucas' words made John fall silent for a moment. The old man's gaze looked into the distance, as if he could see through the river of time and reach 1,000 years ago to see the ancient contract. Heathcliff will protect the Acate family. This is the agreement that the two families made at the beginning of the Third Era. For 1,000 years, the Acate family has risen and fallen several times, but Heathcliff never gave up on this agreement. So why should I give up now? Because the times are changing. Because the situation is changing. No contract is eternal. As smart as you are, you should know that compared to the country, personal agreements are not worth mentioning. You're right. From the perspective of a ruler, an individual can't be higher than a country. The white-haired old man nodded slightly when he heard this, and a smile appeared on the face of the man in the image, but unfortunately, it only lasted for a short second. But I refuse. John Heathcliff casually added, and Lucas' eyes widened as he froze on the spot. Mithril Hermit Order. Why do you think the Acate family came to the theocracy to seek protection? What? Courage, justice, fairness, seeking the future for the living, upholding justice for the dead. These are the duties passed down in their bloodline. For countless years, they have withered away because of this, but they are still unwilling to give up this original mission. Why would such a family seek help from Heathcliff? The old man who was leaning on the chair straightened up, and his expression was solemn. Because they think that we are similar. They agree with Heathcliff's justice, mercy, and tolerance. They think that our family can maintain our original heart and not be swayed by benefits. They think that the blood of angels will keep its promise even if time passes. Personal benefits are indeed inferior to the country. But what do you think the church is? In this world, those who seek benefits have fallen into evil. They do all kinds of evil for eternal life and power. They are the strong in your eyes, and the church is the light for the weak. From the day it was established, it was destined to never yield to benefits. John Heathcliff's tone went from calm to agitated. Now, his hair and beard were all standing up, and the benevolent old man had disappeared, replaced by an angry lion. As a ruler, perhaps I should agree to your conditions. As a patriarch, I should consider the interests of my family first. But before that, I am the sanctum, the leader of the church. I exist here to be kind, fair, and upholding justice. Mithril Hermit Order, your actions have insulted the church and deeply insulted the justice in my heart. Lucas' face was already pale. He could not understand John's heart of justice, but he could feel that invisible waves had spread throughout Lorraine. In places where he could not see, the bishops who were praying silently opened their eyes, and the inquisitors who had been fighting the cultists for years had also picked up their weapons. You can go back, but those who came, stay. Chapter 68. Labyrinth Hall. More than 180 years ago, this small mansion had become the center of the theocracy's destiny. Tens of thousands of warriors fought for it, using their swords to vote for the country's future. That was a period of time filled with blood and humanity. Betrayal and perseverance, slaughter and redemption, conflicting concepts and wills entangled with each other. Princes and princesses faced off against each other, killing each other for the beliefs in their hearts. Luoya had a splitting headache the moment the labyrinth's secret treasure was activated. Even the lacerated wound from an accident in his previous life did not make him feel such intense pain. It was as if his brain was boiling and his blood was burning his nerves. He could feel the pain gathering in his eyes along his scalp, as if molten iron was dripping down his eyes. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't make a sound. Everything around him seemed to be twisting. His vision was red with his closed eyes. At this moment, it was as if his vision was being pulled by something, going against the flow of the scorching heat. Ancient books, stone tablets, broken swords, and illusions flashed before his eyes. Finally, he arrived at the source of the heat. It was a candle lit in the darkness. The candlelight was hazy, the flame flickered, and at the edge of light and darkness, an indistinct figure slowly approached. Luoya was completely sluggish at this moment, and there seemed to be a bell ringing in his ears. King's selection, a hoarse voice poured into his ears. He did not know the source, and there was no trace. The next moment, everything dissipated into nothingness, and darkness descended again. Luoya was completely unconscious. Her blood was jumping. This was what Miss Angel, who was still unconscious, felt. When the labyrinth hall broke through the art room and caused a huge change, the bodies of the two children were swallowed by the light. Nua Ayer's memory was interrupted at that moment, until the burning pain in her blood woke her up again. The blonde girl opened her eyes and found that she was in a completely unfamiliar environment, and beside her was the unconscious black-haired boy. Luoya, what happened to you? Luoya, Luoya. My head hurts, Nua Ayer? It's me. Are you okay? Not good. Luoya replied reluctantly after hearing the girl's question. He felt the pain from his head to his face, and the pain was especially intense in his eyes. He couldn't help but curl up and clench his fists. But after hearing his answer, Nua Ayer seemed to be in a difficult position. Luoya, I know that you're not in a good state right now, but our situation doesn't seem right. The girl's voice carried a rare hint of panic, which distracted Luoya, who was in so much pain that he wanted to roll on the ground, a little. He opened his burning eyes slightly and found that what he saw was something that he couldn't understand. Why would there be sunlight? The youth who had fallen to the ground had forgotten about the pain at this moment as he thought to himself blankly. From the start of Peter's sudden attack to the start of the maze, it took less than half an hour. Even if he fainted on the way, it wouldn't be dawn when he woke up again, right? Luoya's brain was numb. He braced himself and looked around. Then he found that the sunlight was the least of the problems. Half-destroyed houses, blood-stained and corpse-strewn streets, mountainous piles of rubble and overturned carriages. Under the setting sun, everything seemed so dreamy, but the pungent smell of decay and the distant shouts showed the reality and cruelty of the situation. What's going on? This, Luoya. Can the Akkad family's maze create such a scene? Probably not. Then, did Grandpa do something? The black-haired boy propped himself up and looked around with Nua Ayer in confusion. The unprecedented change made the two of them speechless. That Peter doesn't seem to be around here. I clearly saw him being swept in by the light. Peter? Chapter 69. System shut down? Where's Grandpa Lu? You still want to go on strike? The system will continue to operate during the mortgage period. If the host has not paid off the debt within 5 years, the system will automatically cease operations. 5 years to save up 500,000 gold coins. Luoya frowned deeply as he muttered to himself. His eyes scanned the surroundings. Dilapidated walls, corpses strewn all over the place, and the distant place where he couldn't see was filled with a hubbub of voices. It was obvious that there was a large-scale multi-person activity going on. Luoya guessed that it was a war. That's right, the scene in front of him was completely a district in the flames of war. Weapons and corpses aside, intestines were all over the ground. If Luoya hadn't experienced the test of modern societies and censored bloody videos, he would have vomited long ago. The war was basically confirmed, but as for where the war was going to be, Luoya had an unimaginable guess in the depths of his heart. He didn't say it out loud because he sincerely hoped that it wasn't like that. Of course, he also noticed the situation of his teammates. At this time, Nua Ayer was observing the surroundings from a nearby ruin that had a lot of cover. She wanted to find a temporary base, but Luoya clearly caught her subtle movements and expressions. Nua Ayer, there seemed to be something wrong with her body. Although the girl tried her best to hide it, Luoya, the old king of fighters, still understood the principles of human body movement very well. Her series of movements after she recovered her ability to move were very sluggish. It's that beam of light from St. John. But shouldn't that be strengthening? Luoya recalled the situation when St. John stimulated Nua Ayer's bloodline and couldn't help but clench his fists. Don't tell me it's time for the bloodline to advance? Obviously the power of the bloodline got stronger, but the state wasn't good. Roha heard about this situation before. That is when the bloodline gets upgraded. In this world, all extraordinary powers came with a price. Even the bloodline was no exception. Although the price of the angelic bloodline was much lower than those fancy bloodlines, it was still dangerous at the critical moment when one was upgrading from bronze to silver. Recalling the Nua Ayer's performance when facing Peter, Luoya clenched her fists unwillingly. It was fine if he didn't have the opportunity to become strong quickly in the past, but if he didn't take advantage of it now, would he still be a man? Is Nua Ayer's soft rice good? Fragrant. However, Luoya was too shy to eat it. A success rate of 70% was a gamble. 5-card stud. I choose yes. Awaken my bloodline. Activated Bloodline Activation Assistance System. Pain Control System activated. Adaptive Adjustment System activated. Bloodline Awakening Rate 18%. A series of system prompts rang out, like a tube of chicken blood injections injected into Luoya's body. At this moment, the young man's headache rapidly subsided, and the magic essence in his body began to increase explosively. His body made a slight noise, and his bones and muscles seemed to be adjusting to the most suitable structure. A few seconds later, Luoya, who was like a plagued chicken due to his headache, suddenly jumped up. At this moment, his golden eyes were bright, and his movements were swift and powerful. On the other side, Miss Angel, who was still investigating, was stunned. Luoya, are you all right? Basically, I'm fine. Did you find a good target? Not yet. There should be a fierce street battle nearby. There are only a few intact houses, and it's too simple to use as a hiding place. Also, I have a feeling that our position isn't too good. Nua Ayer looked at the corpses all over the ground and frowned. She had been trained in the night since she was young, so she naturally knew that after every battle, the army had to clean up the battlefield, confirm the casualties, and take captives. Especially in street battles, if the corpses were not disposed of in time, once the underground water was contaminated, there was a high possibility of a plague outbreak. In history, there were even cases of dead cities where plagues were prevalent after wars. Then, since this was something that the regular army knew to do, why didn't they collect the corpses here? There were a few possibilities for the answer. First, the casualties are too heavy, and we don't have enough manpower. Second, there are people like the Bones cult who specialize in solving the problem of the dead. They provide enchantments to suppress the plague and curses. As for the third, Nua Ayer swallowed her saliva and said with difficulty, that is, the battle is not over yet, and we are in the middle of the battlefield. Chapter 70. Luoya's heart contracted fiercely at this moment. There was no attack, and there was no physical discomfort. It was purely a physiological reaction caused by the emotional feedback from the shock. Although Luoya already had some vague guesses in his heart because of the previous changes, when the evidence was placed in front of him, he still felt that he could not accept it. Crossing time and space into the vast history, was this the extent of this world's supernatural power? Others did not know, but Luoya felt that it should not be. At least, it was not something that he and Nua Ayer could do. One was a Source Rank 6 super soldier, and the other was a Source Rank 5 angel who had just grasped the source substance and stepped into the door of supernatural. The strength of the two was too weak. Even the Source Rank 4 Peter could easily defeat them. This degree of involving time and space was pure nonsense. This world did not even have a portal. Mobile transportation was a real problem. Luoya had heard Kadia talk about time and space systems before. They were basically castles in the air. At most, they could teleport in a small area, but the price was too high. And this was only the relatively easy-to-understand space. Luoya had never heard of time-related systems. Obviously, Nua Ayer was the same. Could it be that Grandpa sent us here? But our family shouldn't have this kind of ability. Nu-A-Iyer muttered in confusion. His eyes were on Luoya. According to the elimination method, it was either Nu-A-Iyer's problem or Luoya's problem. Unfortunately, the black-haired youth had not grasped the whole situation yet. He did not dare to say anything and could only remain silent. After being silent for a while, Luoya, who had some psychological preparation, was the first to recover and speak his conclusion. Maybe it's because of the secret treasure in the labyrinth, or maybe there's a problem on my side, but in short, we seem to have returned to the Wei Dualia era. This kind of thing, otherwise, there's no way to explain this corpse. Is there a soldier in the world wearing a full set of antiques that are more than 100 years old? Furthermore, this armor is obviously new and not some antique. Luoya picked up the breastplate and examined it. The shiny metal surface didn't show any signs of aging, which made the Nu-A-Iyer speechless. By the way, how did you know that it was an antique from the Wei Dualia period? I've been training with the knights since I was young, so I know the history of these equipment very well. The Nu-A-Iyer seemed to have been attracted by Luoya's question. She pointed at the junction between the chest and shoulder of the armor. The theocracy is currently using a new type of chainmail, but the material used here has changed several times throughout history. The mainstream armor of the Wei Dualia period used this kind of multi-layered, thread-like material. I see. Luoya rubbed the white silk that was as hard as steel wire. It was obvious that this thing was also very new and even a little bouncy. Let's look for other clues and figure out where we are first. The teenager held the armor and gestured to himself a few times, then sighed and threw the armor aside. In fact, he really wanted to wear this thing. One of the reasons was to increase his defense. The other reason was he and the Nu-A-Iyer were dressed too well. They were dressed like little formal wear and dress, which was totally out of place with the surrounding environment. Coupled with their good looks, they looked like two child models standing in the middle of a battlefield. With such eye-catching attire and a different style, they were simply like bright lights on the battlefield. One had to know that the children of nobles were all money in the chaos. If they were captured, they would ask for ransom from their families. If the families gave up, it would be fine, but if the families didn't give up, they would be kidnapped and sold or even killed. Luoya understood this principle, but the Nu-A-Iyer understood it even more. The armor is too big, we can't wear it at all. We have to go to the house and find some plain clothes. It's getting dark, we have to move quickly. The two urgently discussed in the afterglow of the setting sun and set their target as the three relatively well-preserved houses in front of them. The stronger Nu-A-Iyer took the lead, and Luoya brought up the rear with the short sword in his hand. The exploration process was quite smooth. The sun was setting, and the two children's bodies were much smaller than the heavy metal cans, so Luoya and Nu-A-Iyer could ignore the long-range threats to a certain extent. The two first entered the courtyard attached to the house. As usual, there were bloodstains and corpses. The girl looked for a suitable path in front of them, while Luoya observed the surroundings and the corner of the corpse's breastplates. Tiger, tiger, tiger again. Okay, the Eric family has suffered a great loss. This is not a loss. Luoya's mind distinguished between friend and foe, so he slightly suppressed his sympathy and pity. After looking around and confirming that there was no danger, he looked back and jumped into the house through the open window with Nu-A-Iyer. Chapter 71. Peter Carter didn't know how many years it had been since he was called so affectionately, especially by children. He hated children. Those damn brats always laughed at his works of art. Their experience couldn't keep up with the inspiration of an adult like Peter, although not many other adults could keep up with him. But today, his children's popularity suddenly soared, and he even received the affectionate title of Uncle Peter. Of course, there was also a large amount of hatred points. When they heard the word trick, the soldiers who were surrounding Nu-A-Iyer and Nu-A-Iyer were stunned. The leading officer stared at Peter and immediately felt that something was wrong. Although this man's face was as pale as paper and his arm was injured, the rest of his body was intact. The bloodstains on his body were all other people's, and he didn't wear armor in the center of the war. Extraordinaire. His level was not low. Enemy attack! The vigilant officer shouted loudly. At the same time, Carter looked at the soldiers whose expressions suddenly changed and realized that he had been fooled by Luoya. Damn it! Little bastard, what nonsense are you talking about? Disperse the formation. Cover the assault. The officer who realized that the other party might be a wizard directly drew his sword and led the charge without saying a word. The 10 soldiers behind him followed closely. They, who had been on the battlefield for a long time, found that the wizard almost reflexively chose to confront him. Their angry roars completely drowned out Peter's explanation. Wait, I didn't. Damn it. The arrows that pierced through the air became the last straw that broke the camel's back. A few dozen meters away from Luoya and Nuair, a great battle suddenly began. Dozens of soldiers swarmed up and fought with Peter. Soldiers who had seen life and death on the battlefield were different. This group of soldiers was actually not very strong in terms of strength. The 3 officers leading them were only Source Level 5, and the rest were ordinary Source Level 6. They shouldn't be able to fight with Luoya, but the combat strength they displayed was far stronger than Luoya and Nuair. The division of labor and encirclement, the arrow cover, the shield bearers in front and the damage output from behind. The 3 Source Rank 5 players wandered around and stabbed at the back. The perfect system allowed them to be on par with the powerful Peter for a while. Not long after, both sides had already seen blood. The portrait of the Virgin Mary that Peter was so proud of was howling in the air. The soldiers within its attack range were unable to move and had their throats pierced. Unfortunately, the casualties did not make the soldiers retreat. Instead, it aroused their bloodthirst and anger. Peter, who was already injured, was accidentally stabbed in the thigh by the leader of the officers. You're courting death! Peter screamed loudly. Luoya and Nuair began to flee. Neither of the 2 groups was something they could handle. Even watching the show was dangerous. Breathing heavily and clenching their fists, the 2 of them moved forward according to their memories in the fog, but they soon realized that something was wrong. The distance isn't right. We should have arrived long ago. The fog of the March chaos. This is the interior of the labyrinth. There will be ghosts if we reach our destination. What should we do? Does the Ackett family have any records of this? You mean the number of missing people? Luoya complained helplessly. After thinking for a while, she said, there is no way to solve this labyrinth. There's no way to break this maze. That's its strongest point. According to the records, even Prince Vader's personal guards couldn't break through it. Only the owner of the secret treasure of the labyrinth can move about freely. Is it the rainbow-colored gem? Is it with you? Of course not. And considering this history, the gem fragment should be in their hands now. Luoya's eyes looked into the depths of the churning fog. She seemed to be able to see the man and woman who became companions in this battle. They started the good relationship between Ackett and Heath Crete. Mr. Ponte and His Majesty Wei Dualia. Nuair muttered the answer to herself. For a moment, she was lost in thought. As a female leader and ancestor, Wei Dualia had always been her idol. To be able to see her in person, Nuair was a little excited at the thought of this possibility, but Luoya had mixed feelings. Am I going to meet my ancestor? If he hadn't read Ponte's diary, Luoya might have been excited. But now, he only hoped that his ancestor was a decent person. Sigh, the beautification in heroic stories is not just for show. Come to think of it, how can there be a completely righteous person in the world? Is it really to remove one's desires? And without desires, it is equivalent to not having empathy. Can such a person still be called a human? Luoya didn't want to think too deeply about this philosophical question. On one hand, the environment was not right. On the other hand, he found that Nuair's situation was a little strange. Chapter 72. Luoya had always ignored Nuair and even avoided her frequently. Her Royal Highness used to attribute this situation to her lack of charm. However, when the young man protected her in this deadly maze, Nuair realized that this might not be the case. It wasn't that Luoya didn't like her, but he didn't like to flatter her. This guy was stubborn to a certain extent, or rather, he had a high self-esteem. Even the identity of a princess couldn't make him obediently flatter her. However, in contrast, when real danger came, this was a person worth trusting. Nuair felt that she and Luoya were the same kind of people. Not referring to status, but the core part of a person's heart. Justice, kindness, and a certain pride in the heart that made them unwilling to yield. Luoya's actions tonight were completely different. Especially in the studio, Nuair wasn't the only one who experienced the test of humanity. Luoya also had a winged dagger in his hand. Facing a terrifying existence like Peter, even the proud and powerful Nuair couldn't escape fear. How could the weak Luoya not have any fluctuations in his emotions? However, behind the girl, he tenaciously held onto his heart, which made Nuair feel that she didn't misjudge him. Thinking of this, the girl felt the change in her heart. It wasn't for pleasure, nor was it to satisfy her inner desires. It was something that even Nuair couldn't explain. Her heart was warm, but when she thought about it carefully, she felt a little itchy. Her brain was heating up, but it wasn't an illness. She knew that her possessiveness was starting to swell, but even someone as intelligent as her was helpless. Luoya's existence gave her a strange feeling. Although she was still confused, Nuair inexplicably felt that as long as the two of them were together, they might be able to overcome this crisis. The girl was surprised by her strange thoughts. Suddenly, she noticed that Luoya, who was leading the way, stopped. She raised her head and saw a hazy building ahead of them. A monastery. In terms of scale, it wasn't very big. The overall architectural style was very retro. The main building material was stone, and the decoration was made of wood of unknown origin but obviously not expensive. The symbol of the primordial goddess hung above the door. The oil lamp at the door wasn't lit, and it swayed and squeaked in the breeze. Nuair carefully observed the building while Luoya frowned. What the hell was that? Luoya's heart was filled with despair when he saw the buildings in front of him. The dark buildings in the fog were too horrifying. Coupled with the silent atmosphere, it made people flinch. He glanced around and found a map. 42 Rock Street. This should be a small monastery. Nuair took a step forward and stood side by side with Luoya to look at the building in front of them. There was a smile on her face, as if she thought it was a good place. The primordial goddess of this world had a large number of believers. Due to the different customs of different countries, their doctrines were quite lax, and they were roughly divided into two systems. One was the devout ascetics. They usually gathered in monasteries and never married. They focused on teaching and educating the people around them. The other was the church. They could marry and live freely, but they had to listen to the orders of the theocracy during emergencies such as the Holy War. To put it bluntly, the clergy of the primordial goddess of this world were either independent and didn't care about worldly affairs, or they were obedient because they received benefits. And this was the monastery of the ascetics. As for this small monastery, to put it bluntly, it was just like an elementary school. It was small and didn't teach much. The ascetics and nuns were the teachers here. They taught some knowledge to make a living. The cost of going to school here was relatively low, and it was very close to the people. It was a good choice for the people at the bottom to receive education. This architectural style should be from the time of Pelo III. It's been more than 300 years since then. Although it's a small monastery, it's rare that it has been maintained for so long. Luoya's face twitched when he heard Nuair's words of praise. Miss Angel, whose family was the head of the church, had a good impression of this kind of monastery. However, Luoya didn't have this kind of relationship. He felt as if there was a cold wind blowing behind his back. You mean we should go in? Yes, I think this place is pretty good. The building isn't damaged, and there are no signs of large-scale battles nearby. Also, the monastery doesn't lack general supplies like food. We should be able to gain something. Nuair calmly analyzed the pros and cons based on the nearby situation. Luoya, whose eyes were twitching, was speechless. After thinking for a moment, the youth walked in front with his sword. Follow me. Okay. Luoya carefully approached the monastery. He walked past the oil lamps that were creaking in the wind. After cautiously observing the surroundings, he placed his hand on the monastery's door and pushed it forcefully. It's locked. There seems to be someone inside. It shouldn't be a soldier. Otherwise, it would be impossible for there to be no sentries. Chapter 73. Do the two of you have enough bread? I have some jam that I sell on the street. It tastes pretty good. Thank you, Cultivator Crow. Aren't you going to eat some? No thanks, I just ate when the sky turned dark. In the dining hall, the middle-aged cultivator was all smiles as he handed them food and water, as if he was afraid that the two of them would eat too little. Luoya looked at those burning eyes filled with longing and respect, and felt a headache coming on. Favorability plus 100. What's going on? You don't know me, do you? I don't look like a powerhouse who can protect a region, so why is your favorability so high? Luoya looked at the green light that was bouncing around on Crow's head, and his face was filled with doubt. Wait, is it because I'm too handsome? The young man's expression turned serious as he chewed on the bread. He suddenly felt that this guess was very reasonable. Otherwise, why would a stranger treat him so well? He even took out precious food for them to eat freely? In the current chaos of war, the parents of ordinary noble children might not even be alive, so there was no benefit to be gained. Yes, of course, you can ask away. Luoya's mind was filled with random thoughts, and Nuo began to try to start a conversation with this overly enthusiastic cultivator. The girl pondered for a moment, and asked a question that Crow found strange. Right now, it's Princess Wei Dualia's army that's fighting with Prince Vader's army, right? The war within the holy capital had already been going on for more than half a month, and such a large-scale turmoil could be said to be known to everyone. Noel's question was somewhat strange to everyone, and Crow was also taken aback when he heard it, but he immediately reacted. That's right, the holy sun descended from the sky and landed on the ground, so he definitely didn't understand the situation here. Wait, this seems to be a good opportunity for me to perform? You don't know the current situation of the war, right? I'm more clear about it, so how about I explain it to you? That would be great. Thank you, Cultivator Crow. No need, no need. This is what I should do. Looking at the middle-aged cultivator patting his chest in a righteous manner, not to mention Luoya who could see the favorability value, even Nuo was a little confused. But after thinking about it, she could only attribute it to Crow's sense of justice. In the following period of time, Crow fully utilized his intelligence-gathering skills. He took out the methods he usually used to teach children and explained the situation of the two factions. The war had been going on since the beginning of the third month, and more than half a month had passed. Saint Lorraine was under lockdown, and communication with the outside world was cut off. On one side was Prince Vader's allied army, while on the other side was Princess Wei Dualia's Papal Guard and Knights. The allied army was made up of the Barfaz, Wester, and Eric families. But in reality, the Barfaz and Wester families didn't send many troops. This army was mainly made up of the Eric family. On the other hand, Princess Wei Dualia had the support of Marquis Kate, and the Papal Guard and Knights under him became the main force supporting the princess. At first, the two sides were facing each other with the Central Road as the boundary, but the situation quickly changed. The Allied army launched a rapid attack, and it was said that Marquis Eric personally took over a front line of the Wei Dualia's camp. With this as a breakthrough point, the princess's army took a turn for the worse. After that, there was a qualitative change in the development of the war. It completely changed from a game of cards to a meat grinder. As the battle heated up, the number of casualties began to multiply every day, and the holy city was flooded with blood. The current situation of the war was relatively clear. Prince Vader's faction had paid a huge price and completely defeated the princess's army. The commander of the army, Marquis Kate, saw that the situation was not good, and ordered a retreat with Princess Wei Dualia. He also activated a great curse. The area covered by the curse was covered with thick fog every day, and people walking in it would always change their position. It was only a matter of time before the fog dissipated and everything returned to normal. Now, the remnants of the princess's army were said to be hiding in the depths of the fog, and Prince Vader's army was searching for their whereabouts. In short, it was not safe to go anywhere. Wait, how do you know all this? After listening to Crow's detailed strategy, Luoya felt that something was wrong. There was no internet in this day and age, so how did a monk in the monastery know so much? Ordinary people would at most know which side was which, right? Well, after listening to Luo Ya's question, Crow began to stutter. After a long time, he finally told the truth under the scrutinizing gazes of the two. Actually, I used to be a member of the Queen's Army's logistics team. I didn't manage to keep up with the team during the retreat, so I could only return to the monastery with the supplies. The bread that you're eating is the one I brought back. Heh, so you were a cook who fell behind. Chapter 74. 42 Lock Street. Luo Ya and Nu'ayr were sitting opposite each other at the low table where the children usually ate in the small convent. They were both silent. They had just finished listening to a story about the prince of this country. Vader Heathcliff, one of the twins of the royal family, was born intelligent. He had shown a strong learning ability from a young age. His extraordinary talent was one of the best even in the angel family, where there were many abnormal geniuses. According to the standard plot of the story, this prince, who was the first in line to the throne, was so awesome that he was either a typical dragon-proud heaven novel, using the church's fist to beat up Austin and kicking the mutants, or he had realized the limits of humanity and turned completely evil, just like what was recorded in the history books of later generations. However, the reality was that neither was the case. The first 12 years of Prince Vader's life had started out as a novel. His life was stable and happy, but all of this changed when he was 13 years old. It had become a torturous story. The reason for all of this was because of Vader and Wei Dualia's mother, Princess Mary. Princess Mary was born in a viscount's family in the North Sea Territory. Her family wasn't rich, but she met Prince Leon at his 16th birthday party. The two quickly fell in love, and not long after, Leon married Mary against all opposition. They gave birth to a pair of twins, Vader and Wei Dualia. Princess Mary was born into a humble family, so she could understand the hardships of the people. She liked children and was aloof from worldly affairs. She loved to visit the various orphanages and small convents in the holy capital and donated money. Sometimes she would even teach in person. She was highly regarded by the people and was deeply loved by them. However, such a good person had a secret that couldn't be revealed to others. She was actually an extraordinary, and her source substance wasn't one of the three main sources. Instead, it belonged to a pagan religion. When Vader and Wei Dualia were 13 years old, this secret was exposed due to an accident. The wife of the Holy See's Holy See was actually a pagan. This news shook the entire upper echelons of the Holy See, and for a time, all kinds of conspiracy theories emerged. Princess Mary became the target of everyone's attacks. In this storm, Saint Leon was also involved, and Mary became the weakness of the royal family. No one knew the details of the power struggle. In the end, Mary faded out of the sight of the world and was sent to a monastery in the holy capital to live in seclusion. Since then, the two children had been separated from their mother even though they lived in the same city. They had never seen each other again. Originally, this situation could have been changed when Vader ascended the throne. Unfortunately, time did not give him the chance. When Prince Vader was 15 years old, an epidemic broke out in the holy capital. Naturally, the heavily guarded palace was not affected, but Vader's mother's monastery was in the epidemic zone. In March of year 814, Mary died of an illness. This princess who had been loved by the world all her life passed away silently. There was no mourning, no funeral. It was as if she had never existed in this world. Only Vader and Wei Dualia were the signs of her existence. This incident deeply affected the young Vader. No one knew how the 15-year-old child felt when he heard that his mother had died outside the palace. No one knew what he was thinking at that time. All people could see was his actions. He studied diligently and trained hard. Compared to Wei Dualia, who washed his face with tears, it was as if he did not know about his mother's death. The nobles who had once besieged the royal family and the opportunists who had taken advantage of the situation heaved a sigh of relief. They praised him for being able to distinguish right from wrong and for being righteous. However, what they did not know was that the more repressed the silence, the more ferocious and difficult to resist when it erupted. Vader did not lose his memory. He was just sharpening his blade. He sharpened all his anger and sorrow into a sharp blade. He sharpened it for 4 years. In March of year 818, on the anniversary of his mother's death, he drew his blade and cut down half of the theocracy. None of the nobles who had attacked the royal family or the bishops who had insulted Mary had escaped his butcher's blade. He did not give anyone a chance to defend themselves, just like how they had not given Mary a chance back then. If all he did was kill people, then no matter how reasonable it was, Vader would be nothing more than a murderous demon immersed in vengeance. However, the reality was the complete opposite. Not only did Vader act, but he also had thoughts. The Reformist Party was the name of the faction that Vader led. Most of them were hot-blooded youths who advocated revising many of the doctrines regarding heretics in order to unite the heretics within the theocracy. As a representative, Vader had taken a huge risk to change the origin substance. After losing the origin substance, Vader, who had become a heretic, had voluntarily given up his inheritance rights. As the saying went, fight with your back to the river. If you don't succeed, you die trying. Such a resolute attitude moved the hesitant heretics, and they all joined Vader's camp. Even 3 of the 5 great nobles had been roped in by him through some unknown method. After Leon had left the theocracy, Vader, who had endured patiently for 4 years, had built up his power. The following outcome could be foreseen. The Reformist Party launched a coup d'état with an unstoppable momentum and hammered the heads of the conservatives. Wei Dualia and Ponte were the last strongholds of the conservatives. As long as they were defeated and Wei Dualia was captured, Vader could force Leon to acknowledge the Reformist Party's views. If Leon did not wish to pass the throne to the other families, then he could only agree to the doctrine's reform. After hearing the cause and process of the war, Luoya and Tuair were in such a state. There was no other reason other than the fact that this was too different from the history that they had seen in their later generations. Luoya could not find anything wrong with Vader's actions, at least in the first half. In fact, he was happy to hear and applaud it. Even a passerby could feel the injustice of Mary's story, let alone a socialist youth like Luoya who did not have any religious conservative ideology. Good kill. Don't talk to me about forgiveness. If you want to forgive someone, your mother will die first. Only after she dies will you have the right and position to forgive someone else. Avenging one's mother was an action that most people would accept. Even if it was against the law, it would still be tolerated by many. This was because such actions were in line with the most primitive morals of humans. However, Luoya did not dare to make any assertions about Prince Vader's Reformist Party. There were no descriptions of this faction in history. He was not in this era and did not understand the social situation. However, according to Friar Klaus, although the Reformist Party's views were radical, they were also reasonable. In the past decade or so, the stable environment of the theocracy had attracted more and more heretics. They had gradually become a force that could not be underestimated. On the bright side, many heretics could help improve the lives of the people. They were also members of the productive forces of society. There was no lack of experts among them. As long as they were used well, they would be a huge resource. But from a bad perspective, since origin substances were unstable, there was a chance that they would fall into depravity due to the price they had to pay for their advancement. They would become evil cultists who would commit all sorts of crimes. In reality, the boundaries between cultists and cultists were quite blurry. It was difficult for many people to determine who they were. In addition, the security of the Holy Capital had indeed been deteriorating over the past 10 years. Chapter 75. Your Highness, it's time for you to get up. In the bedroom of an ordinary house, a golden-haired knight dressed in armor walked into the room and softly called out to the young man on the bed. Hearing the call, the young man opened his eyes and sat up from the bed. This was a golden-haired, blue-eyed man with regular and handsome facial features. His eyes were sharp, and he wore light armor. His whole body carried a swift and decisive temperament. Vader Heathcliff, the first successor of the theocracy of Saint Maester, was also the current commander of this army. Felder, what time is it? It's already 6 in the evening, Your Highness. Is that so? Speaking of which, is it necessary for a marquis like you to wake me up personally? Vader glanced at the young man standing beside him. If an outsider saw such a helmeted and armored person coming to wake him up, they would probably think that he was an orderly. Who would have thought that he was actually a powerful marquis of the theocracy? Felder Eric, the head of the Eric Marquis, one of the 5 great nobles of the theocracy. He was young, but his skills were extraordinary. In his 20s, he was already an expert of Source Level 3. He was Vader's trusted aide and good friend. No matter which country or region, extraordinaires who entered Source Level 3 could be called experts. Although it was only Level 1, there was a huge difference between Source Level 4 and Source Level 3. The threshold between Source Level 3 and Source Level 4 was something that tens of thousands of extraordinaires would find difficult to cross in their lifetime. And Felder was an accomplished genius at this age. His talent was also top-notch among the many nobles. In addition to the power of the Eric family, the strongest of the 5 great nobles, it could be said that he was already an influential figure in the theocracy at such a young age. However, such a noble genius did not have a trace of disrespect in front of this young man who had just woken up. When he heard the question, he put one hand on his chest and bowed slightly, saying with a smile, "Of course, it's my honor." Felder's thoughts blurted out from his heart as he watched the young man's thoughts fly. Finally, he had reached this point. Felder was a genius, but compared to the heir of the royal family in front of him, his honors were nothing. Vader Heathcliff, who had advanced to Source Level 3 at the age of 18, learned martial arts from a palace knight of the Kingdom of Knights. At such a young age, he was already so knowledgeable that even the scholars of Bologna knew of his good name. Such a monarch was naturally worthy of following. Furthermore, Felder and Vader had the same ambitions and ideals, so the two were like-minded. How's the search for Way Dualia? No results for now. As expected, Vader Heathcliff, Felder Eric to Felders. After 2 hours of sleep, Vader stood up and looked out of the foggy window. Ever since they entered the maze set up by Pant, Vader and Felder had been sleeping for 2 hours every morning and night without fog and with good vision. It was Felder in the morning and Vader in the evening. The two of them took turns to keep watch. It would be a lie to say that they weren't tired after the continuous battles. But even so, they still couldn't figure out the location of their opponents. The passage of time is disadvantageous to us. We can't delay any longer. Otherwise, the sanctum might have problems. Do you have any good ideas? Your Highness. Urgent military intelligence. A soldier rushed in and interrupted the Marquis's words, but the 2 men in the room were not angry. Instead, they turned around in surprise. After all, there were no enemy forces in this maze. The military intelligence brought by the soldier was definitely not a battle, so there was only one possibility left. Deep in Rock Street, there's a reaction from the royal bloodline. It's Princess Way Dualia. What's the matter? Is this thing broken? In a beautifully decorated room, a black-haired man looked at the detection device on the table and frowned. This bloodline tracking curse vessel exclusive to the royal family could be said to be quite precious. At present, only 3 members of the royal family owned it, and the one in the man's hand now came from one of them, Princess Way Dualia Heathcliff. Simply put, it was a student's item. Chapter 76. Finally, there's a clue to get out. Luoya looked at the countdown and evaluation on the panel and heaved a huge sigh of relief. Sure enough, the current situation between him and Nuair was only temporary. It was probably a situation similar to the game's dungeon in his previous life. As for what this dungeon was for, Luoya looked at the line of words. Bloodline awakening rate, 60%. He felt that there was an 80% chance that it was for this thing, and the evaluation should be the amount of benefits obtained after the bloodline awakening. After all, performance and rewards should be linked. System, what's the standard for this evaluation? The standard is a combination of all the host's actions, decisions, achievements, and other indicators, unable to be specified. If that's the case, then at least give me a direction to work towards, and that king selection is, the end of different paths will lead to different results. The right to choose is in your hands. The system will not force the host to do anything, but it is recommended that you carry forward the family spirit and stimulate the possibilities in your bloodline. Luoya listened to the system's words and began to ponder. He realized that he didn't have an answer. Kadia didn't talk much about this, and most of it was about educating the children of nobles, nothing special. This question is too difficult, can't you at least give me an answer? It's difficult to give a correct answer based on idealism. It is also recommended that the host, the heavens are vigorous, the gentleman, okay, you don't have to say anything. Luoya waved his hand speechlessly. He laid on the wooden bed covered with a blanket and pondered for a while, but he still couldn't come up with an answer. He could only shake his head and throw the question to the back of his mind. He turned to look at the system's 60% value and estimated the completion time in his heart. After the conversation with Monk Crow, it was already late at night. If he counted from the time when Luoya and Nua Iyer appeared in the ruins in the evening, then the system's bloodline awakening rate could be said to be very impressive. Perhaps he would have already awakened by the time he opened his eyes tomorrow. Sigh, if only it could be that easy. The black-haired youth sighed. What he said before was under the premise of only looking at the bloodline awakening rate, but in fact, there were two more important information. Extremely dangerous, 70% success rate. These two pieces of information could be said to have poured cold water on Luoya's fantasy. Now that the awakening process was more than half done, Luoya's body didn't feel anything at all. He didn't know if this was good or bad, but he could only prepare himself to deal with unknown dangers at any time. As for the success rate of 70%, Luoya had already given up on the treatment. After all, the worst thing that could happen to a 5-card stud was failure. He would become an unlucky debtor who owed 500,000 gold coins but didn't get anything out of it. There's a countdown of 73 hours. Do I just have to get through this time, or do I have to do something? Who exactly is the witness? After a tiring day, the youth stared at the numerical value in the system as he pondered. His consciousness gradually began to blur, and he didn't know when he had completely fallen asleep. Peter Carter gritted his teeth and pulled out the long sword stuck in his thigh with difficulty. When the blade left his body, Peter cried out in pain. Dark red blood also splashed out, quickly dyeing the nearby clothes red. There was no doubt that this was a fatal injury for ordinary people. The speed of blood loss from the main artery in the leg was no joke. People would die from blood loss within a few minutes. However, for extraordinaires, they had many ways to deal with this situation. Not to mention the various healing skills. Even if they didn't have this method, ordinary flesh and blood control could greatly reduce the bleeding. Peter, who had reached the source level 4, could naturally do this, but for him, just reducing the bleeding was not enough. It hurts, damn it. It hurts. Those two little bastards. The black-haired man with a pale face trembled as he held his thigh and cursed. Then, magic flowed on his body, and 3 portraits appeared around him. The first painting was the Virgin Mary that Luoya and the others had seen before. The second painting was a group of girls bathing in the river. The last painting was a noble lady with a pet dog. The 3 paintings, each one of them was what Luoya called the underworld. The 7 orifices of the characters were empty. The river where the girls were bathing was full of blood. The pet dog's face was ferocious and its body was full of blood. The noble lady's body was withered and her muscles were atrophied. Peter looked at the 3 paintings, his red eyes wandering. He looked at his injured shoulder and thigh, gritted his teeth and pointed at the painting of the girls bathing and activated a curse. Scapegoat designated a painting to transfer the damage. The pain of the painter will be borne by the painting. Chapter 77. First Contact? What does this mean? Luoya's low sleepiness was dispelled by the system's words. His eyes widened as he recalled the dream, and his body broke out in a cold sweat. No, it can't be. In this day and age, people even skipped premonitions and went straight to reality? Luoya gripped the quilt tightly. The bed in the monastery was already hard as hell, and now something like this happened. He couldn't sleep at all. The black-haired teenager stared at the systems, calculating, and his thoughts ran wild. According to the French system's conduct, it wouldn't take the initiative to cause trouble. Now that something popped up, it must be Luo Ya's own change. Another number also caught his attention. Bloodline Awakening, 80%. Luo Ya stared at the number and looked at the time. It had been more than 2 hours since he fell asleep. Normally, Luo Ya wouldn't be surprised if it reached this number, but the problem was, the number didn't move. He was stuck. As for why, Luo Ya already had a guess. Is this the answer to that question? The teenager muttered to himself. At the same time, the system moved again. Ding! Information updated. Host has obtained a special status. Gulen Dayer's promise. You have made a promise with the king, and you will bring back the truth. Effect. Obtain a powerful strength attribute bonus. Temporary immortality. Lasts for 30 seconds. Remaining uses 3. Immortality. Luo Ya looked at his interface and couldn't help but exclaim. He never thought that he could get a skill from dancing on a burial mound. Damn, what the hell is that big skeleton? It's too fierce, but the answer? Luo Ya thought of the huge skeleton and couldn't help but frown. How did the dead transfer their power? Roha really wasn't clear about this problem. In the end, in this world with supernatural powers, what kind of person is considered dead? For example, that mountain-like skeleton, it should have been a giant. That bloody plain with bones and swords everywhere must have been an ancient battlefield. It should also be the place where he died. But is he dead? It's hard to say. And its power, what kind of power does it transfer? Skill? Bloodline? Knowledge? Luo Ya scratched his head and felt that the problem was a little complicated. But soon another matter diverted his attention. Wait, he said, I'm in trouble. What is this? Luo Ya frowned. He had a bad premonition, but before he could think about it, he heard footsteps in the corridor. Croft's panicked voice came from outside the door. Not good. Lord Luo Ya, Miss Nuire has fallen ill. I found Miss Noelle at the table when I woke up. There was a glass of water on the floor. It seemed like she wanted to drink some water. I touched her head and found that it was very hot. I couldn't wake her up, so I carried her here and hurriedly called you. I understand. Cultivator Crow, don't panic. Chapter 78. What nonsense are you spouting? After hearing Nuire's words, Luo Ya was stunned for a moment before retorting. However, Miss Angel was very calm. I'm just stating the truth. You know it, right? It's impossible to bring me along in this situation. The blonde girl smiled bitterly. At this moment, Luo Ya saw a trace of gentleness on her face that was completely different from before. It was a smile with some gentleness and poignant beauty. It was an expression that the young man thought would never appear on Noelle's face. It was kindness in a desperate situation, and it was like a farewell before leaving. Don't worry about me. I'll drag you to your death. Don't be silly. I can't leave you here. What else can I do? Carry me on my back? In this fog filled with murderous intent? Nuire chuckled and shook her head slightly. Impossible. If you do that, you won't even be able to escape if you encounter a group of soldiers. We have no status in this era. If we get caught, we won't have a good ending. Luo Ya listened to Nuire's words with a heavy heart. Now that Prince Vader wanted to use his status as the sole heir to the Holy See to force reforms, be it Wei Dualia or Nuire, they were all obstacles. Wei Dualia might be fine because they were siblings from the same mother, but Nuire, who had an angelic bloodline of unknown origin, would definitely be dealt with by Vader. On the other hand, the Queen's army should welcome her. But where were they? In this fog that lasted for almost 22 hours, the whereabouts of Ponte and Wei Dualia were not something they could grasp. Even Luo Ya of the Labyrinth Pavilion could not find them. And don't forget, there's still someone chasing after us. Peter Carter, who was involved in this incident, will not let us go. He will definitely chase after us with all his might. How ironic, we don't know how to go back either. Nuire's face was full of ridicule, as if she could already see the tragic end of the beast who violated humanity. However, she then looked at Luo Ya with a calm expression. If you bring me along, both of us will die. Luo Ya stared at the Nuire's blue eyes. His expression kept changing. The girl was telling the truth, and he understood that. But just because of this, he could leave the Nuire alone here? Don't give up so easily. We should think of a way first. Solution? Can you think of a way to carry me on your back to avoid the soldiers that appear out of nowhere and escape from the evil clutches of that damned cultist? No, there's no such method in the world, at least we don't. Even if we're in good condition, we might not be able to do it. Nuair's reasonable rebuttal left Luoya speechless, but that didn't mean that he had agreed to the matter. The young man remained silent, his mouth shut tight, his eyes unwavering, and the stubbornness on his face made the young girl understand his choice at a glance. "You are such a fool." The young girl turned her head, no longer looking at the person behind her. Her loose blonde hair covered her lowered face, covering the tears in her eyes and the uncontrollable joy in her heart. Favorability plus 2,000. This was the first time she felt this way. Nuair thought at this moment. She obviously wanted to persuade him to leave, but when she got his answer, she couldn't help but feel touched. The young girl felt a little guilty for thinking the opposite way of thinking, but at the same time, an unprecedented sense of security enveloped her. Nuair sighed. She suddenly felt that death wasn't scary at all. What was scary was dying alone. June 15th, what? My baptism day, June 15th, remember it. The blonde angel leaned weakly into the young man's embrace. Her voice was soft and gentle. If you go back alone, although it's not very likely, but if father and grandfather are angry at you, tell them this date. Baptism day can only be told to those closest to you. They will understand when they hear this. Luoya listened to the young girl's weak words and the words those closest to you. His face twisted a little. He blinked his eyes, wanting to say something, but he didn't know what to say. Only the uncomfortable feeling of something stuck in his throat remained. Chapter 79. As the saying goes, it's important to know one's own limits. Luoya felt that this principle was applicable no matter where he was, especially in this world where extraordinary powers existed. Knowing one's own limits could sometimes even be a matter of life and death. Luoya had always believed that it was better to be prepared than to be unprepared. Drawing up a plan in advance was the most important thing. Therefore, before taking action, even before facing a crisis and fighting for the hot blood in his heart, he would always think about it. The enemy, human skin carver, Peter Carter, was not an ordinary person. Judging from the situation where he was surrounded before, he should have killed or even completely destroyed the group of soldiers before he could find the time to find trouble with Luoya. That army had 3 source rank 5 who were similar to Nuair, and a group of source rank 6. Calculating Peter's strength in this way, it could be determined that he was at source ranked 4. It should be impossible for him to be at source rank 3. Once he reached source rank 3, he would be a high-level extraordinary. The gap between him and low-level extraordinary would be greatly widened. There was no reason why he couldn't deal with that group of soldiers. Considering the way Nuair faced Peter in the art room, it could be concluded that Nuair did not have the confidence to defeat him. As the inheritor of the angel bloodline, Nuair's strength was naturally not comparable to an ordinary source rank 5. He should have the ability to challenge those above his level. Therefore, Luoya came to his final conclusion. Peter Carter's strength should be at the upper reaches of source rank 4 or even the peak. He was 2 whole levels lower than Luoya. Normally speaking, it was impossible for a peak source ranked 6 to challenge a peak source ranked 4. However, after thinking about it, Luoya felt that he had a chance. Peter Carter was strong, but he also had an obvious weakness. That was, he seemed to be a pure mage. Regardless of whether it was the various portraits he had displayed in the art studio or the way he attacked and defended against the army, they were all standard mages. He himself had never displayed any offensive abilities, and had even been stabbed in the leg by someone who caught him off guard. In other words, if one only looked at his physical strength, he should be below a level 5 source grade knight who specialized in close combat. He might even be inferior to Luoya. After a bloody battle, his condition should be even worse. Luoya had heard from Kadia that every time the Holy See encircled and annihilated the cultists, they almost never had the upper hand at the beginning of the battle. This was because the cultists' extraordinary powers were generally ferocious. However, as long as the cultists were dragged into a protracted battle, they would immediately have a one-sided advantage. They might not even need the judges to make a move. The cultists would not be able to pay the price and would die abruptly. These were the basic characteristics of evil cults. With the addition of the mage's weakness, Luo Ya's plan was born. Backstab him. This was Luo Ya's plan. For this, he needed enough attack power to break through Peter's defense, as well as a means to get close to him quickly. The black-haired youth held the silver dagger in his hand. This was the key to his victory tonight. This holy blade had a holy attribute and was the natural nemesis of evil cults. A mere 4-source grade knight's defense was not worth mentioning in front of it. After absorbing the blood of him and Nuair for a month, the winged dagger finally gave birth to its first ability. This ability was like Luo Ya's wish, bringing him hope. Winged dagger. The energy crystal residue produced when the first-generation bloodline awakened resonated with the mercy source substance. The long years and the user have given it a new ability. Uncontrollable, 3 times a day, jump to a designated position within sight. The distance is adjusted according to the nature of the wielder's spell. After carefully reading these descriptions, Luo Ya basically defined the ability of the winged dagger in his heart. Jumping dagger, but with some restrictions. The ability of the winged dagger last night could be said to be Luo Ya's trump card. It was also the best way for him to get close to the dead orphan who used human skin as a canvas, was addicted to grinding people and painting people. But although this skill was good, if Luo Ya didn't use it well, it would still be very dangerous. Because the activation requirement must be within sight, Luo Ya couldn't use the uncontrollable skill to pass through walls, and in a foggy environment, sight would be severely obstructed. The jumping range of uncontrollable was likely to be shortened to within 10 meters, which was too disadvantageous for Luo Ya. The attack range of Peter's portraits was at least 20 meters, and jumping within 10 meters was basically a waste of time. Moreover, because the activation of the skill required magic, jumping continuously consumed too much energy. Even Luo Ya, who was in a good state now, couldn't bear it. He had to find a way to solve this problem, and he did find a solution in the favorability exchange area. Black Crow Fog Lamp. Warm light penetrates obstacles. Fog City sells tool to guide people home. The light turns green in the poisonous fog. Please don't go out. Price, 500 points/lamp. Luo Ya had always felt that his French system wasn't reliable, but he didn't expect that in the end he really found a solution. The appearance of this Black Crow Fog Lamp was like a jigsaw puzzle, filling in the last missing piece of Luo Ya's plan. The black-haired teenager carried the fog lamp that emitted a yellow light in the fog, and began a night full of murderous intent before dawn. Peter Carter felt that the situation was a little wrong. In the fog, the black-haired man with a pale face clutched his injured arm, a pair of dim yellow eyes staring at the gloomy monastery in front of him. He didn't have enough knowledge like Nuair, so naturally he couldn't distinguish the architectural style. Like Luo Ya, he only felt that this place was a little strange. The man glanced at the withered noblewoman who was leading the way, then at the pet dog that was covered in blisters. Chapter 80. Vader Heathcliff looked out of the window, silently waiting for the light to shine on the earth again. Dusk and dawn were fixed resting times in this large maze that divided all the blocks within the range into dozens of disorderly pieces every half a day. There was an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening. During this hour, the large maze would fail and the fog would recede. When the fog gushed out again, a new maze would be created. The information collected in the past half a day would be completely invalid. This was also why Vader couldn't find Wei Dualia and the others. Unless more than 100,000 people were brought to fill all the blocks, they would have to face a lucky draw probability of 1 in 10. The army couldn't march too fast in the fog, so the efficiency of the army was even lower than expected. But last night, Vader had a goal. He didn't need to be confused anymore. The reason for everything was the bloodline reaction in Rock Street. Wei Dualia was there. Although he didn't know why she canceled the cover of the Curse Vessel's bloodline, there was no doubt that it helped Vader a lot. When the fog dissipated at dawn, he would lead his personal guards straight to Rock Street. "Your Highness, although I don't know what way Dualia and Ponte are up to, they must have prepared something since they dared to expose their position. It should be a trap." Ferd Eric's face was solemn. He looked at the young man who was looking out of the window with his back to him. "Please stay here and let me lead the troops first." The blond man asked for Solitude's order, but the young man with his back to him didn't respond. Vader looked out of the window silently, as if he didn't hear Ferd's request. "Ferd, why do you think my mother died?" It's those nobles." The blond knight was stunned by the irrelevant answer. He blinked his eyes in confusion and said his answer. Vader shook his head. "No, those nobles are just appearances. The real reason is the difference." "Difference?" The young man turned around and explained faintly, "The difference in geography, race, country, religion, all these differences make people afraid. It is like a fence between people. It stands tall and keeps people in captivity, but it also makes the people in the fence have a stronger sense of selfishness. They look at everything outside angrily. No matter what your identity is, no matter what you've done, once you're discovered to be different, you'll receive special treatment if you're lucky, and you'll be persecuted if you're lucky. My mother died because of this. Did I avenge her in this war? In other people's eyes, it's already revenge. Those nobles who forced her to leave are all dead, but I know that I haven't. At least, I haven't completed it yet. My mother died from an infectious disease, from the coercion of the nobles, and even more so from the discrimination and resistance born from the difference in ideas. Those are my real enemies, and they are what I need to break. In order to break these high walls, there are too many things that we need to eliminate. It's difficult to eliminate these differences, but it's not impossible. For example, a unified empire like ancient Austin from 1,000 years ago. Vader looked at the dumbfounded Felder, his eyes shining brightly. "You once asked me what my dream was. Now I'll tell you. This is my dream. In order to realize it, I will face many difficulties, and your strength is indispensable. So, don't say such silly things like abandoning a pawn." The prince smiled faintly and rejected Felder's request, but the golden-haired knight was still in shock. Although Felder had always known that he was following a mighty lord, he didn't expect Vader's ambition to be so great that he even wanted to rebuild a unified empire. But, if it was him, with his talent and the strength of the theocracy, it might be possible. The golden-haired knight looked at this rare genius that only appeared once in hundreds of years. He stood at attention and bowed again. "Thank you for your appreciation. I'm willing to follow you for life, Your Highness." "Is that so? Hee, then it's impossible for you to go to Rock Street alone. So what if it's Wei Dualia's trap? If you shrink back in the face of such a small risk, how can you talk about the great cause of unification?" The young prince smiled. He didn't have a crown on his head, but at this moment, his aura had far surpassed that of a king. "Don, let's march. Vader will definitely go, I promise." In the Labyrinth Museum, Victoria tapped the flashing red dot on Lock Street with her finger and looked at the black-haired man who had a helpless look on his face. Ponte held his notebook in a daze and stammered for a long time before saying. Chapter 81. Inside the monastery, Friar Crow was trembling in fear as he held his sword that had never seen blood since it was sharpened. He was huddled in a small fortress made of wooden planks and furniture in front of his bed. Although Crow was nearing middle age and had seen a lot, he was still a scholar. Most of his life was spent in the monastery, teaching children how to read and do math, and telling the nearby residents the stories of the primordial goddess. That was all he lived for. When he joined the Queen's Army's logistics unit a while ago, Crow felt that it was the most thrilling moment of his life. The wounded and the dead were brought back from the battlefield every day. In just a few days, he saw more blood than he had seen in his entire life. When he returned to the monastery, although he was disappointed because he was left behind, he was also relieved. He felt that he could finally return to the life he was familiar with. But he never thought that in this familiar monastery he would meet Shia's messenger and then encounter the vicious evil cultists. Outside the monastery's gate, the furious Peter had completely released his curse. Countless ghosts wandered in the nearby fog. The evil aura and the wailing of the portraits sounded like blasphemous prayers in Crow's ears. Crow's eyes stared at the tightly shut door as he panted heavily. Large beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. He looked back at the girl sleeping on the bed with a complicated and timid expression on his face. The Son of God is fighting, right? The middle-aged friar thought. His faith told him what he should do, but the reality was that he was trembling and could do nothing. After all, in his opinion, only the Son of God could punish those evil extraordinaries. In Claude's eyes, Luo Ye and Nuo Ayer were different from ordinary people. It was not just the difference in strength, but also the difference in personality and other aspects. Powerful but not arrogant, polite and approachable, brave and fearless, and able to choose to fight without hesitation in the face of a terrible enemy. This was not something ordinary people could do. It was better to say that ordinary people were in a completely different state when facing the evil cultists. Cowardice, fear, yes men, and the inability to muster up the courage to resist the evil existence. This was not an exception in this world, but the common reaction of most people. Nuo Ayer's courage in the face of the cultists came from his family's heritage and the pride of his bloodline. Luo Ye's courage in the face of the cultists came from the righteousness and responsibility in his heart. Although the reasons were different, they had unknowingly crossed the threshold in their hearts. The surrender of power was not scary. What was scary was the surrender of the soul. The special feeling that Crow felt from the two of them was the noble and unyielding spirit. He had only felt this feeling from a few people in the past, including the current Holy See and Princess Wei Dualia. May Shia bless you. Sincerely praying for the two of them, Crow looked at the statue of the goddess in front of him and muttered to himself. Peter had never thought that there would be a day when he would be forced to defend himself with all his might by a little kid of origin grade 6. Now that the lady with the dog was directly sent to the sky by the Holy See's dagger, the only paintings that Peter could command were the Holy Virgin Mary and some miscellaneous things that could not be put on the table. Fat merchants, rigid soldiers, crying maids. Peter's early paintings were brought out one by one. Most of these paintings were limited in strength and didn't have much use. They were the lousy works that Peter was ashamed to let others see. But now, he couldn't care less about that. In an environment where the visibility was less than 10 meters, the mysterious disappearance of the enemy was obviously a magic weapon, a short sword. Everything gathered together and turned into a murderous intent that made Peter tremble with fear in the dark night. The pale-faced man gasped for breath, trying his best to calm his heart. Don't panic. It's just a little kid of origin grade 6, so what if he has a treasure? His actual combat experience and psychological endurance are definitely not as good as mine. I'm the hunter, he's the prey. You think you hid well? I saw you a long time ago. Peter shouted loudly as he thought, trying to trick Luo Ye out, but in the fog of the night, there was no movement except for the screams of the vengeful spirits. The man's dim yellow eyes widened in anger, but suddenly he sensed that there was movement in the defensive net of the paintings 20 meters behind him. Found it. The moment he heard the message from the painting, the red light in Peter's hand suddenly shot behind him. A vicious curse that could turn people into blood-colored sludge crossed the night and hit a figure covered in red gauze. Haha, found you. Now you know the gap between us, little brat. You think you can defeat me with a few good things? It's simply a fantasy. Peter, who found that the attack had hit him, was overjoyed. His face showed a presumptuous smile as he stepped closer, deciding to watch Luo Ye's painful expression as his body turned into blood before he died. However, what he didn't expect was that he did see Luo Ye's expression, but it wasn't pain. Instead, it was a mocking smile that his plan had succeeded. At this time, Luo Ye was lying on the ground. In his hand was the amethyst pendant that could not be activated in the personal studio space. In the sparkling light, a layer of hard barrier stuck to his body and completely enveloped him. No matter how the paintings in the fog hit him, he was unharmed. The moment he saw that Luo Ye was fine, Peter opened his mouth wide and lost his words, but Luo Ye's eyes were like stars, overflowing with killing intent. I see you. The young man's voice was like an invitation letter from the Grim Reaper. In the next moment, Luo Ya's figure disappeared into thin air. A strong wind blew behind Peter, and a silver dagger pierced through the protective Virgin Mary statue before the man had time to react, rushing all the way forward with irresistible force. Pucci! Chapter 82. How is it possible, cough? In the fog outside the monastery, a battle to the death finally came to an end. Under the silver sword light, Peter Carter's body was cut in half. The range of the distorted painting was broken through, and he no longer had the means to save his life. The magic essence quickly disappeared with the loss of blood, and the painting of the bound soul in the air finally ushered in a release. The screams gradually dissipated, and Peter's pupils began to dilate as he lay on the ground. I didn't expect to be here. Hee, but boy, don't be complacent. Making a deal with that kind of existence, one day you will also. The man with only half of his body left recalled the great existence he had just seen. Before he finished speaking, he had already died, leaving only a mocking smile on his face. Luo Ya, covered in blood, gasped for breath, but he could no longer hear anything else. He could only feel the scorching heat in his body. The undead state was still in effect. At the end of this skill, many of the injuries caused by the Virgin Mary statue began to recover rapidly. His flesh began to wriggle like sprouts, connecting and healing, and the recovery ability unique to the undead was filling the hole in his body. 3, 2, 1, 0. Skills-Gulen-Dayer's agreement ended, the sound of the end of the skill sounded, and at the same time, the evaluation data in the system also spun wildly and finally stopped. Luo Ya glanced at the evaluation in the system and was not surprised by the skyrocketing value. He reached out to touch the bloody hole in his chest and found that there was only a layer of blood there, and the skin below had recovered. Is the recovery ability of the undead so powerful? Luo Ya thought, recalling the zombies and other things in various works in his previous life. According to the morality of this world, that kind of thing might be considered a little brother. The effect is good, but it's so tiring. The black-haired boy shook his body. From an ordinary human to an undead creature and back again, his body had suffered great damage in the process. Even if the wound had healed now, the weakness of his body still could not be immediately improved. If there was a sentence to describe Luo Ya's feelings now, it would be, his body seemed to be hollowed out. The black-haired boy's body swayed as he glanced back and forth a few times before he leaned against the signboard at the entrance of the monastery with difficulty. The signboard for 42 Rock Street had been in disrepair for a long time and could not bear the weight of the Luo Ya. He took deep breaths to calm the discomfort in his body and turned his head to look at the monastery in the fog. A relieved smile appeared on his face. Although he was surrounded by danger and had used a large number of tools, Luo Ya, who was at a disadvantage in the source grade, had still won in the end. He had protected the unconscious Nua Iyer, which was enough for him. But after her, I might fall sick too. The young man gripped his dagger and smiled bitterly. He gritted his teeth and struggled to walk towards the monastery. He had to get Friar Crow to deal with Peter's corpse, otherwise, it would attract soldiers, Luo Ya thought as he moved his legs. Suddenly, he found that his vision was much clearer. He looked up and found that the sky was already bright. The golden sunlight began to penetrate the fog. Dawn and dusk. This was the time to rest and rearrange the sequence of locations in the Great Labyrinth. It was a routine that only had 2 hours a day. Luo Ya looked at his reflection on the ground and sighed with relief. The long night had finally passed. But before this simple sigh could leave his mouth, the young man was stunned because he found that there was another shadow beside the small figure on the ground. There was someone behind him. Luo Ya suddenly felt a sense of danger. In this place where danger lurked everywhere, Luo Ya had no allies to speak of. So, when he saw the situation, he did not hesitate to stab back with the dagger in his hand and quickly adjust his body. But he did not expect that the almost invincible dagger would fail this time. Ding! A metallic hum sounded from the dagger. Luoya stared in disbelief behind him and saw a handsome blonde man holding the tip of the dagger with his finger. Yes, it was just a finger. It was a slender and white index finger with distinct joints. From the state of the muscles, it could be seen that he did not use much strength and did not use much supernatural power. According to common sense, the dagger should have directly penetrated such a delicate finger, but the situation now was the opposite. The dagger failed, and Luoya could find the reason. Looking up at the face that was similar to the unconscious blonde girl in the monastery, Luoya had already figured out the identity of the person behind him in just a few seconds. He also knew that his worst expectations had become reality. He and Nua Iyer were caught. Chapter 83. Calamity of Blood. This was a skill that Luoya took advantage of the King of Fighters event in the manner. Its effect was very mysterious and had a probability of being effective. So far, it had only appeared on Peter Carter. The activation of Calamity of Blood wasn't completely useless. At least, Luoya knew that he had become the target of the cult. When the blonde knight looked at Luoya indifferently, the skill was activated for the second time. In Luoya's eyes, a pink lump appeared on the blonde knight's head. The color wasn't very deep. From this, it could be seen that although this man wanted to kill him, it was just a side effect. What really shocked Luoya was something else. That's right, it was the name on the lump. Vader's left hand, Ferd Eric, Brian Eric. When Luoya first saw this string of text, he wasn't very surprised. However, when he finished reading the content in the brackets, his mood changed completely. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was struck by lightning. Brian Eric. The sudden appearance of this name caused Luoya's mind to go blank. His first reaction was that when the labyrinth was activated, it somehow involved this Earl of the Border? This question appeared for a brief moment before it was immediately dismissed. It wasn't just because Brian couldn't have been eavesdropping outside the room in the labyrinth. More importantly, Luoya discovered that Brian had a complete social network. The soldiers who obeyed his orders, Vader who gave him orders, and Brian's attitude all represented that he was Ferd Eric, a person of this era. However, the appearance of the skill couldn't be wrong. Why would Brian's name appear? After thinking for a while, Luoya could only come up with one answer. That was, the Ferd of this era was the future Brian. According to the historical records, the patriarch of the Eric family committed suicide after the defeat of the Eric family. This was probably true. However, Ferd, who committed suicide, somehow came back to life and was still active in the era of John of the Holy See more than 100 years later. Luoya's heartbeat quickened as he discovered the shocking secret. His eyes involuntarily stared at the blonde knight. Of course, he was discovered. Kid, I don't know where you're from, but the person in front of you just now was Prince Vader. You better not be so disrespectful next time. Felder then ignored Luoya after saying those threatening words. Layers of soldiers slowly approached the monastery under his lead. The elite suicide squad was the first to rush in. No, don't kill me. I'm just a cultivator. The door was kicked open, followed by Monk Crow's strange cry. The footsteps of a large group of soldiers resounded in the monastery. Not long after, a soldier rushed out. Your Highness. Found it. All right. When Prince Vader heard his subordinate's report, he smiled for the first time. He quickly walked into the monastery and entered Nua Iyer's room under the instructions of the soldiers. The young man who entered the room did not even look at Monk Crow, who was forced into a corner by swords and blades. Instead, he looked directly at the unconscious girl on the bed and sighed in relief. He won. Although more than half a month of internal strife and heavy casualties had passed, he still won in the end. As long as he captured Wei Dualia, his plan would be invulnerable. But I didn't expect that guy Ponte to leave you alone and escape. To think that I thought the two of you... Wait, that's not right. Looking at Wei Dualia, who was talking to himself on the bed, Vader approached the bed with a sharp gaze. Suddenly, he felt a strong sense of disharmony. It was a double strangeness in his body and bloodline. What's wrong with this body? Although Wei Dualia's body had always been like that of a child, he should never look so young. It was as if he had regressed by a few years. Furthermore, this bloodline power, Vader felt the bloodline power of the girl on the bed, which was of the same origin as his own. He widened his eyes in disbelief. The girl on the bed only had a bloodline of bronze rank. This was obviously not right because he and Wei Dualia had advanced to silver rank 6 years ago. Regressed bloodline? This was simply impossible, just like how it was impossible for a person to go back in time during puberty. Then, could it be that her age had regressed? No, even a level 1 source ranker would not be able to make Wei Dualia, who had the bloodline of angels, age regress. Such a person simply did not exist. After rejecting one possibility after another, Vader had no choice but to accept a fact that left him dumbfounded. That was, this girl did not seem to be Wei Dualia. Call the young man outside in here. Hurry! Vader, who had discovered the truth, was about to call Luoya to inquire about the situation. Unexpectedly, the books in the room suddenly flashed violently. In the next moment, countless papers began to spurt out, causing the golden-haired young man's expression to change drastically. Shit! The familiar curse power caused Vader to draw his sword out of reflex. However, he did not expect that the flipping pages would not attack him. Instead, they rushed toward the unconscious girl on the bed. Within the tornado of pages, the figure of a black-haired man appeared out of thin air. He grabbed the unconscious girl and turned around to give Vader a polite smile. "Good morning, Your Highness Vader. And goodbye." Chapter 84. When the black-haired man flew across the sky, Luoya raised his head and felt the fear of missing the bus. Although Luoya didn't know who the black-haired man was, judging from the blonde little girl in his arms, he was most likely his ancestor. Unfortunately, Ponte's car didn't have a seat for him. "Nua Iyer," the black-haired boy exclaimed. He had no choice but to accept the fact that he missed the rescue. But looking at the two people flying across the sky, his heart was hanging in the air. "What the hell? Boss, this is a war zone. Why are you floating in the sky? Aren't you a live target? Can't you crawl after a round of arrows?" Roja didn't know what Ponte thought, but he knew what the soldiers with him thought, such as the ones beside him. "Who is that? Enemy! Shoot him down! Shoot him down!" The shouting soldiers drew their bows and knocked their arrows. They were clearly enraged by the target hovering above their heads. In just a short second, hundreds of arrows had already streaked across the sky, shooting towards the man in the sky. "Not good." Luoya exclaimed at this moment. His mind went blank. He had just experienced the power of the arrows in the Shia world, so he naturally knew how powerful the arrows were. But what he didn't expect was that the scene he saw wasn't a bloody scene. Instead, it was a scene that made him doubt his life. Spell, distortion. Just as the arrows were about to pierce his heart, the black-haired man in the air suddenly opened his mouth and chanted something softly. Then, the arrows that were chasing after his but turned the steering wheel in unison and went around his side as if they were old drivers encountering traffic police. Looking at this scene that defied the laws of physics, Luoya and the soldiers were equally dumbfounded. Soon, with Felder's roar, the man's identity was revealed. "That's the head of the Akate family, Ponte Akate. Keep shooting. Don't stop. Whoever hits him will be promoted by 1 level." Felder's angry roar sounded not far away. At the same time, the golden-haired knight also swung his sword and slashed out. It had to be said that Felder's strength was quite terrifying. The crescent-shaped slash actually caused a sonic boom. The terrifying magic fluctuation far exceeded that of the level 4 source rank Peter Carter he killed before. Luoya even suspected that this slash could directly eliminate someone of Peter's level. Such a powerful spell fluctuation naturally attracted the attention of the entire battlefield, but to everyone's surprise, in the face of such a ferocious attack, Ponte Akate still did not move. Incantation, internal diffusion. The black-haired nobleman calmly looked behind him and exchanged glances with his old rival, Felder, who was glaring at him from the ground. The corner of his mouth curled into a gentlemanly smile. In the next moment, the slash that was about to hit Ponte's body suddenly exploded from within. The powerful slash that was capable of tearing apart even the toughest Hall's steel was turned into a shockwave that pushed Pont in all directions. Not only did it not hurt Pont, but it also sent him flying even faster. "Thank you for seeing me off, Markfelder." Leaving these words that made the golden-haired knight want to stomp his feet in anger, Pont, with a smile on his face, had already crossed the center line of the battlefield. The man who entered the airspace of Princess Wei Dualia's army landed, and the knights below immediately rushed to cover him with their large shields. "The Legion commander is coming down. Shield bearers! Shield bearers! Counterattack!" As soon as they saw Pont fall from the sky, the bodyguards with tower shields immediately formed a circle. At the same time, Princess Wei Dualia ordered to release the firepower, and the rain of arrows in the sky began to thicken again. Luoya looked at Pont, who was floating like a cloud among the tens of thousands of soldiers, and couldn't help but yearn for him. Although Luoya knew that the heads of the Akate family were not easy to deal with, but a strong person like Pont who could ignore the battlefield far exceeded Luoya's expectations. "When can I be this strong?" The black-haired boy looked up at the sky. The scene of Pont rescuing Nuaire had undoubtedly given him a huge shock. Before this, Luoya had never had such a concrete understanding of supernatural power, and this scene was equivalent to a flame that completely ignited his passion for supernatural power. However, as the saying goes, dreams are plentiful, but reality is harsh. Although Luoya was proud of himself, he soon discovered a very serious problem. "Wait a minute," Nuaire was rescued, and Pont ran over. "What about me? What should I do?" The black-haired boy looked up and saw that the rain of arrows on Wei Dualia's side had stopped because of Pont's arrival, and the enemy obviously didn't know of his existence. Chapter 85. Wei Dualia, I've brought the girl back. On the battlefield, a black-haired man descended from the sky with a young girl in his arms, landing directly in the middle of the shield formed by the soldiers. Wei Dualia, who was commanding the battle on the front lines, passed command to his adjutant and appeared before Ponte, who had just returned from the enemy's camp. At this time, Her Highness was different from when she was in the labyrinth. There was no trace of arrogance on her face, and on the contrary, there was obvious concern. Although Wei Dualia had always been an elegant and well-behaved girl in front of outsiders, and it was normal for her to wear a mask, she was sincere at this time. Ponte's lone troop infiltration seemed easy, but it was actually very dangerous. In the enemy camp, Prince Vader and Marquis Felder's strength were comparable to Ponte's, but with the advantage of the school of spells and Ponte's wonderful use of curses, he was able to go through the motions in front of both of them. Without a doubt, this rather heroic action not only made Luoya's blood boil, but also deeply captured the heart of a certain someone and greatly boosted the morale of the soldiers. "Welcome back, Master. What's wrong with this child?" Wei Dualia came to Ponte's side, who secretly heaved a sigh of relief after landing on the ground, and was immediately attracted by the young girl he was holding by the waist. Wei Dualia's eyes narrowed when he realized that the new royal blood was actually a young girl, and before the man could say anything, he directly snatched the girl away. Although Ponte was a proper person, everyone had some fetishes. Due to the price, Ponte's fetish for women was always publicly known in Wei Dualia, and this tragic situation where there was no secret could be said to be Wei Dualia's trump card to control Ponte. Her Highness was very vigilant, and Ponte was very innocent. He was afraid that Wei Dualia would misunderstand, so he held the girl by the waist, but he didn't expect this measure to be ineffective. I really. Sigh, forget it." Ponte's eyes swept across the surrounding soldiers, and in the end he didn't say anything, but he knew that it was useless. Wei Dualia probably wouldn't listen, because she was busy looking at her new relative. The moment she snatched the Nuaire from Ponte and turned it over, Wei Dualia's body froze. The face that was full of holiness, golden hair that seemed to glow, and a slender and beautiful body. The first time Luoya saw the Nuaire, the princess was stunned, but that wasn't the reason why she froze. The reason why she was so shocked, because the resemblance was too great. Yes, Noelle and Victoria were too similar. Whether it was their faces or temperament, it was as if Victoria had been regressed by 10 years. If not for the difference in age, Victoria would even suspect that she was a twin or a triplet when she was born. What's going on? Why does the illegitimate child look so much like her? Ponte, who witnessed Wei Dualia's actions from the side, was also stunned. When he was saving the princess, Ponte's mind was focused on the enemy, and he didn't pay much attention to the girl's face. Now, he was full of questions. How could they look so similar even though they didn't share the same mother? Was the royal bloodline so strong? Wait, why is she unconscious? I don't know. She was unconscious when I saved her. Did Vader do something? No, this child is having a high fever. It's the bloodline. She's going to be promoted. As an experienced person, Wei Dualia immediately figured out the reason after examining the Nua Ayer's body. Then she couldn't help but widen her eyes, and for the second time, her expression was full of surprise. The current generation of Heathcliff's successors were Wei Dualia and Vader. Both of them were praised as geniuses since they were young, and their extraordinary talents were also among the top in the entire history of the family. Even so, the two of them were promoted to silver at the age of 13. How old was the unconscious girl in front of her now? 11? Or 12? Wei Dualia wasn't sure, but she knew one thing, and that was that this long-lost clansman had incredible talent. As long as she was carefully nurtured, she would become a big figure in the human world in the future. She had to protect her life, guide her to promote, and never let her fall into Vader's hands. Wei Dualia, whose willpower was unprecedentedly strong, reached out her hand. Under the guidance of the source substance of mercy, the holy light began to slowly channel the accumulated bloodline power in Nua Ayer's body. Ponte was relieved when he saw this. He didn't look at the two girls who looked like sisters anymore. Instead, he turned to check the situation at the front line and took out a rainbow-colored gem. The secret labyrinth treasure, the ancestral artifact of the Akkad family. Although it was slightly flawed, its power was still far beyond imagination. Even though Queen Victoria's army looked ferocious, it was mainly because they had the advantage of a surprise attack. If they were to clash head-on with Vader's personal guards, they wouldn't be able to defeat them. In fact, they might even be defeated again. Due to the good relationship between the Patriarch, Ferd, and Vader, the Eric family had invested a lot in this rebellion. Coupled with the pagan forces that had been entrenched in the capital for a long time, the combination of these two forces was unstoppable. On the other hand, the Akkad family, which supported Wei Dualia, had their private army completely blocked outside the city. Since they couldn't win, they might as well not fight and preserve their strength while waiting for the return of the Holy See. This was Ponte's strategy. As soon as he returned, he began to activate the secret labyrinth treasure to summon the thick fog back. Boom! Unfortunately, Ponte's thoughts were immediately discovered by the other party. From 1,000 meters away, Ponte looked at the golden-haired young man and felt as if a lifetime had passed. Although it hadn't been long, Ponte had actually been Vader's teacher. In his opinion, this young man had enough talent to be a true genius. However, some things happened that changed Vader's mind and gradually led him and Wei Dualia to different paths. Chapter 86. Wei Dualia-sama. I have a companion. His name is Luo Yakat. He is a black-haired, golden-eyed boy, the same age as me. He is very important to me. Please find him. We are now in the middle of a battlefield looking for someone. Wait, you said Akkad? Wei Dualia suddenly caught the key word from Nua Ayer's mouth. Her eyes widened and she couldn't help but look forward. Pont, who was gathering his power, also turned around. Teacher, is there such a person in your family? No, there isn't, but... The black-haired man stared at the golden-haired girl supported by Wei Dualia. His mind was digesting the information she said, and he felt like he remembered something important. After Nua Ayer heard Wei Dualia's name, she immediately understood Pont's identity. You must be Marquis Pont. Please find a way to save Luoya. He is of the Akkad family's bloodline. He should have been captured by the enemy army. Nua Ayer's urgent cry for help shook Pont's mind, but it also gave Luoya an opportunity. The black-haired man's magic stopped in front of the rainbow-colored gem, and he hesitated for a moment. Although he didn't know this child, the Akot family's bloodline deeply stimulated Ponce's nerves. There was no other way, there were not many people. Although the Akot family had been doing well for generations, there was an unsolvable mystery in terms of population. Every family head was basically a general without an army, and there were very few siblings. Because of this, the Akot family especially valued their family members, completely different from those nobles who only had 6, 7, 8 or 9 members and then competed with each other. Child, is your companion really one of my people? I swear on my bloodline. Please find a way to bring him back. Nu'ayr said while bowing deeply. She couldn't care less about her pride in the current situation. She couldn't accept Luoya not knowing whether he was alive or dead. The two of them had been walking in this big maze for so long, it shouldn't end like this. Wei Dualiya, I'll leave this to you for now. I'm going to try my luck in front. But looking for someone in such a chaotic battlefield, there are too few people in our clan. Even if it's a side branch, I don't want to give up without doing anything. Don't worry, I will activate the maze before Vader completely bites us. After leaving this promise, the black-haired man set off again. At the center line of the battlefield, Luoya had already killed his way out. Scram! Inside the canal, Luoya kicked the third leg of a soldier from the Eric family with a golden hook, using the least effort in exchange for the greatest result. The soldier who was unlucky enough to be kicked by Luoya was thrown off his feet by the Wei Dualiya soldiers. After unleashing a fierce move, Luoya took a few deep breaths. Of course, he didn't take the risk to eliminate one more enemy. In fact, he had encountered a difficult problem. As the battlefield heated up, the canal became difficult to traverse. Originally, Luoya wanted to follow the canal directly into Wei Dualiya's territory, but reality taught him a lesson. Now that the rain of arrows had stopped and both sides were engaged in close combat, there were more and more people in the small canal. There were living, dead, half-dead, and all kinds of people. For example, the one who Luoya kicked in the crotch was a victor who crawled out after rolling into the canal with a Wei Dualiya soldier. But unfortunately, the victory was only temporary. In the end, he was defeated by the Celestial Empire's ultimate move, the national kick in the crotch. There was no future for a water thief. Luoya used practical actions to prove this famous saying from his previous life. But as the saying goes, there's always a way out. Luoya's kick really did create a future. What's going on? Why is there a child on the battlefield? He helped me kill the enemy. He seems to be on our side. The soldier who worked closely with Luoya to kill the enemy's captain spoke up. The black-haired boy, who wanted to change his route, quickly jumped out and said something shocking. Important military information. Please protect me when I meet Wei Dualiya. The black-haired boy said as he pulled out his winged dagger. The soldiers reflexively picked up their swords, but the holy shadow of the blade immediately attracted everyone's attention. This is a token given to me by His Highness. It's a holy dagger kept by the Heathcliff family. Please help me return to His Highness. The cautious Luoya was afraid that the spell would detect his lies, so he spoke the truth as soon as he opened his mouth. Chapter 87. The system's countdown was drowned out by Luoya's angry roar. The black-haired youth had begun his final burst. Luoya didn't know who the Gulandair was. Perhaps no one in this world did, but he had to admit that the skill he gave Luoya was indeed powerful. It even gave him the upper hand in terms of strength when facing Felder. The blonde knight was in a difficult situation. Luoya's other attributes weren't that great, but his strength alone was enough to overwhelm him. As the saying goes, a strong man can defeat 10 skilled men. In close combat, strength was often the most important factor that determined victory or defeat. Fortunately, Felder was a veteran of the battlefield. His skills and agility were far superior to Luoya's. Even if he was at a disadvantage in one of his main attributes, he wouldn't be defeated so quickly. He also knew that Luoya's burst would only last for a short time. Power and price. This was the eternal theme of this world. Felder could roughly see Luoya's true strength. He was probably only at source rank 6. Such a body could withstand the power of Luo Ya's temporary immortality. However, this immortality that was similar to super regeneration could not be maintained for long. Felder understood this, and Luo Ya, who was using the skill, understood it even more. He knew the emptiness that came after using the skill. When he couldn't defeat Felder in the first 10 seconds, Luo Ya knew that 30 seconds wouldn't solve the problem. However, he still gave it his all because he believed that someone could see it. And the reality proved his speculation right. At the end of the countdown, a man's voice appeared out of thin air. It was as if a hero would appear at the last moment. "Boy, well done. Spell, Gravity Core." When he heard the man named Ponte's words, Luo Ya knew that he had won the gamble. The skill, Gulan Dayer's promise, had finally reached the end. The golden-haired knight's expression changed. He could feel a strange spell reaction coming from his armor. He looked up and saw a rain of arrows and swords stained with blood shooting at him from all directions. "Bastard! You're playing these tricks again." Felder released his magic essence in anger, and his whole body was covered in bloody light. In front of him, a man who was originally fighting against him had appeared behind the young man who was smiling lightly. Ponte Akat and Felderic, the two nobles of the Saint Maester theocracy and the actual commanders of both armies, stared at each other on the battlefield, causing the surrounding air to smell like it was being burnt. "Punit, that kid is a heretic. So, do I have to share it with you, Marquis Felder?" The black-haired man smiled mockingly. Looking at the angry knight, he didn't say anything else. He waved his hand and hooked Luo Ya, who was already exhausted. A large number of fluttering pages gushed out from his body. "I'm always busy with saving people. Forgive me for not accompanying you. Goodbye, Lord Marquis." "You?" Before Felder could answer, Luo Ya's vision was filled with messy pages, and the sounds of the battlefield completely disappeared. The next moment, the pages disappeared, and the location outside had become the front line of Princess Wei Dualia's army. "Teacher!" "Luo Ya!" Two female voices rang in the ears of the men of Akat. Seeing that Ponte had successfully retreated, Wei Dualia breathed a sigh of relief. Nua Iyer directly rushed to the side of the boy and hugged him in her arms. After activating the skill twice, Luo Ya, who was in severe pain all over his body, almost fainted on the spot when Nua Iyer hugged him. The girl hurriedly loosened her grip. "So, sorry, I didn't mean to." Iyer looked worriedly at Luo Ya, who was covered in blood, and anxiously checked his injuries. Wei Dualia saw this scene and couldn't help but take a deep look at the black-haired boy. "This child so cute. I always felt that he was a little similar to teacher, but Nua Iyer's reaction." Wei Dualia narrowed his eyes thoughtfully, and his expression became strange. Ponte began to get busy. "Don't worry about the reserves. Cover the archers, everyone retreat." Ponte, who had returned to his camp, did not relax. The rainbow-colored gemstone appeared in his hand again. After the magical essence surged into the gemstone, the labyrinth's secret treasure shone brightly, and the fog in the air rapidly increased. The red thunder was still trying to offset the power of the labyrinth, but the difference was like the difference between a match and a water basin. Vader, who was also at Source Grade 3, could not suppress Ponte, who was supported by equipment and the field. Under the thick fog, Wei Dualia's army quickly retreated. Their behavior of abandoning their weapons and running back was clearly specially ordered. And this dumbfounding full-speed retreat was indeed effective. Almost all the soldiers who could move ran back. Manpower was the most precious resource for the already small Wei Dualia army. Chapter 88. Oh, we meet again. For those who have obtained my power in the past, you are the one who reunited with me the fastest. On the blood-red plains, the huge skeleton looked down at the small child and said with interest, "You're right. Those who have obtained my power, even if it's just a little bit, will cherish it very much. They won't dare to use it easily. I have never seen someone like you who used it twice in a day. Isn't power meant to be used? At the critical moment, you can use your trump card to get what you can't get. I think this is the best way to use power, and that's what I did." The black-haired boy looked up at the Gulandair and said his thoughts faintly. The huge skeleton was silent for a moment as if it was thinking about something. After a moment, it nodded. Yes, power is indeed something that you don't need to be stingy with. Its existence needs to be shown. The Gulandair seemed to be in a good mood after saying this sentence. Its huge body lay down on its side and closed the distance between it and Luoya. It was obviously interested in this little child. Since ancient times, powerful warriors have always displayed their bravery on the battlefield in order to gain awe. This all will give birth to power and influence, which will also become a part of their strength. Your second battle was like this. Those people saw your bravery, which will greatly change your situation. But what about your first battle? What was it for? Was it for the little angel? Luoya listened to the Gulandair's question and recalled the battle with Peter Carter. It was a battle that no one knew about in the fog. Even Father Crow didn't witness it. Killing Peter didn't bring any direct gain of fame and fortune. Instead, it was full of danger. The black-haired boy looked at the Gulandair and sat on the ground. He recalled the image of the little angel in his heart and said these words. After the huge skeleton heard this, its eyes flickered. After a long time, it said, I understand. Yes. You want to mate with her? The words of the Gulandair made Luoya's eyes widen. The boy raised his head and stared at the huge skeleton in front of him. His small eyes were full of doubts. His handsome and cute little face flushed at a speed visible to the naked eye. How could you say that? When did I say that? I'm still a child. Could it not be? You don't want to mate with her? What do you mean by mating? That's not the problem. The young man's face turned red as he flew into a rage out of embarrassment. What I want to say is that I did the right thing. Why would you think of that? Luoya's explanation made the Gulandair silent. The huge skeleton's eyes flickered as if it was recalling the past. The right thing to do? What was the right thing to do in this world? Sometimes what people think is right often doesn't end well. Gulandair said with a sigh. Luoya narrowed his eyes. He obviously heard something else. There are two kinds of correctness, relative correctness and absolute correctness. It all depends on which one you're talking about. What do you mean? Absolute correctness is the truth. For example, I'm a human male. This is an objective fact. Relative correctness is more complicated. Take Peter, who I killed as an example. In my eyes, Peter is an evil person who commits all kinds of crimes. He's a madman with a mental problem. In my opinion, killing him is the right thing to do. But in the eyes of some hostile forces, Peter might be a good person. Killing him is wrong. Different angles of looking at the problem will lead to different results. Which kind of correctness do you think it is? Luoya's question didn't get an answer. The Gulandair seemed to have fallen into deep thought after listening to Luoya's words. His completely expressionless skeleton face was motionless. For a moment, only the sound of the nearby wind and sand could be heard between the two. My correctness is probably the second kind. The huge skeleton stopped thinking and stood up. A large amount of sand and stones began to fall from the gaps of his body. Luoya couldn't help but cover his mouth. Luoya, Akit? Your idea is quite interesting, but you've already used up 2 of the 3 skills I gave you. The next time we meet, it will be the time for you to bring me the answer. Chapter 89. This woman is so similar to Nuair. This was Luoya's first reaction when he saw Wei Dualia. It was basically the same as Nuair's, but the boy quickly reacted. Although they were similar, they were only similar for now. Luoya remembered how Nuair looked like in the game when she grew up. Although she didn't change much, her figure was still quite good. Compared to her, Wei Dualia was more regrettable. Calculating her age, she should be around 20 years old, but her body, even if Nuair was enlarged a little, it was a little. Luoya was complaining in his heart when he suddenly saw the black-haired man behind the princess. The boy's eyes widened and he suddenly thought of a question. Wait, that's not right. According to the diary left behind by Pont's ancestor, wasn't he a lowly lover? If that's the case, Why did he reject Wei Dualia in the end? At first, Luoya thought that Pont was a scumbag who flirted with little girls, but as the few of them began to talk, Luoya gradually realized that something was wrong. This Wei Dualia was not only a natural loli, but she also seemed to have Pont completely under her control. Teacher, their relationship is really good. Now that you mention it, some families have recently started to oppose traditional arranged marriages, especially the young people. They are very quick to accept new things. Wei Dualia's words with deep meaning made Pont's face show a helpless expression, but Luoya could see that this helplessness was based on a certain degree of doting. It seemed that these two people really cared about each other in their hearts. Of course, Luoya didn't only see the surface, but also the essence. Although Wei Dualia hid it well, he was very familiar with the temperament that Wei Dualia occasionally revealed. He turned his head to look at Nua Iyer, who was also well-educated, and suddenly understood why she was a sadomasochist. Okay, it's passed down from generation to generation. Perhaps sensing Luoya's thoughts, Nua Iyer turned her head and glared at him. Luoya quickly averted his gaze and met Pont's eyes. The two men from the Akot family looked at each other and suddenly felt very close to each other. That's right, it was a comrade in arms who was also poisoned by the women of Heidi Crit family. It was hot, passionate, and filled with the desire to vent. But unfortunately, it was just a thought. Whether it was Luoya or not. Usually it was fine, but when it was time to speak, they were resolutely to support their angel. After all, if they were heard, it would no longer be a joke. Pont and Wei Dualia came to see Luoya this time and said a lot, but they didn't delve into the identity of the two. They seemed to think that the two appeared out of nowhere because Leon had been hiding it for a long time, and the problem only broke out during the chaos of war. Luoya was happy to see this. He raised his hand and put the blame on the sanctum, who was thousands of miles away. Nua Iyer expressed her helplessness, but she didn't say anything. Child, although you have been wronged for so long, you must believe that your father will not abandon any of the people of Heidi Crit. Vader may speak sweet words to you, but don't believe him. He walks the path of a tyrant. Wei Dualia stroked Nua Iyer's cheek and gently comforted his sister. Luoya looked at the two masochist queens' tender expressions and his eyebrows twitched. He looked up at Pont and saw the expression on the man's face. Mr. Pont, I have some questions about the family. I wonder if it's convenient for you? Luoya took the opportunity to look up at his ancestor. Pont looked at Luoya and nodded, obviously not putting on airs. Your name is Luoya, right? I'm the current head of the Akot family. You can ask me anything about the family. As the head of a small family, Pont hoped that there would be more people in his family. Besides, an outsider like Luoya wouldn't have the right to inherit the family, so there wouldn't be any conflict with the family. However, if something happened, they would contribute to the family. Pont knew this very well, so he was very open about it. What he didn't expect was that the young man from the Akot family didn't ask about returning to the family. Instead, he asked a very important question. Head of the Pont family, our family has its own bloodline, right? Can you tell me more about this? Luoya's golden eyes were full of determination as he looked at Pont. After a moment of surprise, the man seemed to have thought of something. His expression changed and he hurriedly asked, Wait, was your performance on the battlefield because of your bloodline? You can say that. Luoya's hesitant words made Pont's eyes widen. The next moment, he grabbed Luoya's hand and walked out. Child, come with me. Huh? Pont, where are you going? The study. I have something to say to this child, so don't mind me. After dismissing the curious Wei Dualia sisters, Pont pulled Luoya through the heavy door and came to a study with fewer books. The two sat on opposite sides of the table. Pont wasn't in a hurry to speak. Instead, he poured 2 cups of tea and pondered for a long time. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.